Hello and welcome, esteemed guests and passengers. This is Lily speaking, and I'll be your captain during this voyage. Today, we're finally going to continue our media deep dive series of the game of all time, Twisted Wonderland. If you haven't checked out my first video of the series, you should probably watch that before checking out this one, since it contains information that is pretty much required to understand everything, basically. But it's a super quick video, I promise. Don't look at the runtime. But if you'd rather stick around here and then check out part 1 later, that's fine. I'll accept your terms and give a brief summary of the relevant information so we can all be on the same page. Cool? Cool. So, Twisted Wonderland is the child of an union between Michael Mouse and Yana Toboso. The game is mainly a visual novel with card battle elements and a gacha system. Its story revolves around the magic training school called Night Raven College, where the students are inspired by classic Disney villains and sorted into 7 different dorms. The main character, Yu, is a mostly blank slate meant to represent whomever the player chooses, inspiring many different creations from the fandom. Yu was transported into the world of Twisted Wonderland, and now stays at Night Raven College with their familiar Grimm, attending classes and events, making friends, helping the students confront their inner demons, getting involved in international conspiracies that are much bigger than them, and trying to find a way back home. Besides the story and characters, we also covered Twist's release history in both versions, how the dorms and movies inspirations work, and the challenges that come from translating a game that's so heavy with dialogue and text to a language as finicky as English, where we also highlighted how the translation team makes certain choices that sure are choices. They sometimes end up contradicting already established facts of the world, going against character personalities, or just erasing the already very small representation that we have in the original text. How fun! This translation issue will be a reoccurring theme in every main storybook and event, so better get used to it and follow YuuRei in all of their social media to know more details. Finally, we went through the basics of gameplay and the surprising musical bops of the rhythm game segments. And now here we are. If you think that's already way too much stuff, you have no idea, babe. We're not even out of the 1.0 release. In this video, we're going to discuss the entirety of Book 2, the main characters of the episodes, their inspirations and motivations, as well as their character arcs. Speaking of arcs, we'll also track the evolution of characters from different dorms, given Twist's storytelling structure of having the main forces from the previous book directly influence the events of the dorm in focus, as they continue to improve in their own character journeys after those experiences, especially the Bucchi character. But before we go forward, I have to give a few heads up about the assets I'll be able to use in this video. If you watched the previous deep dive, you probably realized that I used the Heartslabyul manga panels to help illustrate the main scenes of the prologue and of Book 1. And that's because, even though the sprites of the game are very expressive and the voice acting is phenomenal, Twist is still a visual novel. So, when it comes to action-heavy scenes, like fights or large crowd events, it becomes a little harder to visualize everything given the limitation of the in-game sprites, their movements, and the available backgrounds. Plus, the chibi style of the Twist tunes and battles certainly doesn't help the tone of the scenes.
Diamond earring came up in the ocean and it's gone. And there's people that are dying.
That's why I love the manga portrayal so much. It helps to complement the setup of the game where its media format was limited in. However, the comic for Savanaclaw isn't 100% finished. It's close, they're getting there, they're just right before the overplot fight, but alas, not yet. So, for this video, we'll need to rely on the game visuals and our imaginations to give a little more oomph to these moments. Even more so given how easy the early fights are if you have a decent late game theme. Why, back in my day, Riddle was the biggest card power gatekeeper. Ah, how the mighty have fallen. What the game does gives us to work with, however, is the fully voice-acted scenes, which I'll be taking plenty advantage of. But, as we also know, this game only has the Japanese dub. I am aware of the absolutely incredible fandub project taking place here on YouTube, and you should absolutely go check it out if you haven't yet to show your support. It's really good. But for this video, I'll be using the original game audio along with the translated text for the more emotional moments. If you rely on English audio to watch my videos, I do apologize. I swear, I even tried to dub some of the scenes myself, but yeah, no. Unfortunately, I am no voice actor. Those scenes will lose their entire emotional weight with my goofy-ass voice. So, until further notice, that's what we have to work with. Let's make the most of it, yeah? As for the structure of this deep dive, I decided to shake things up a bit. We'll begin with the general book recap and explanations about character inspiration/roles. Then, I'll talk about my thoughts on the book as a whole before moving on to the character analysis sections, with a few added bonus topics here and there. This should hopefully help keep things organized and prevent me from going on unrelated tangents. Don't worry, those will have their own special spot later. Also, this should be obvious, but spoilers ahead. For the whole story, you have been warned. Finally, if you're confused about me only covering book 2 in this video despite the thumbnail I showed before also featuring Azul, then I have an explanation for that change. I yapped too much. This video script got too big, and I learned from my previous video that my computer doesn't do well with giant files. I'm working on updating it, but until then, I'll either have to yap less, or, the most likely scenario, have to split video topics into multiple parts. Because God has cursed me for my hubris, I guess.
I had an epiphany.
I am going to throw myself into the sea.
But worry not, my pace and posting schedule may be as slow as a plot-significant snail, but I'm committed to seeing this deep dive series through to the end. I just don't want to force myself to cram everything into a giant project and increase my workload when I have so many other topics I want to cover, be they twist-related or from my other beloved fandoms. But regardless, I hope you guys choose to stick around here and see this through with me. The support you've all shown me for these videos is really amazing, and well, it's kinda obvious that I'm something of a yapper, just a little bit, and so I've always wanted to share my ice-cold takes with people, you know, being 6 months late to everything. But it made me really happy to receive so many positive responses in my project so far. The Twist Deep Dive was my first big video, and I've learned a lot since then, so hopefully I'll continue to improve and try to make your days at least a little bit more fun with my ramblings. Here's to more future rants. Now, I think it's about time I got started. Whether you're a new guest or a long-time passenger, I do hope you enjoy your stay. Get comfy, grab some snacks, and if you like the experience, why not stick around by hitting subscribe and clicking the little bell. That way, you'll be notified about every new journey we take in the future. Now, strap on your safety belts, keep your limbs inside the vessel, and let's proceed with takeoff. Destination set, Night Raven College. Let's go full speed ahead.
Twisted Wonderland.
We start book 2 with a good old Disney-sponsored ominous vision. Have you or a loved one experienced Disney-sponsored ominous vision? Symptoms include being the main character, getting plagued by unclear meta-knowledge, and having nostalgia for old 2D animation movies. Contact Night Raven College's management department and be put on hold for an indefinite amount of time. Disney-sponsored ominous vision. We own your death. Beware of rodents. Once it's properly morning, we, aka UMC Twisted Wonderland, wake up our roommate Grim, the most cutesy and woosy, fluffiest, grumpiest, silly little guy. And we head out of our assigned residence, the Ramshackle dorm, in order to attend the government's mandated magic class. We thankfully skip over the boring parts and arrive at lunch break, where Grim is complaining to our best friend duo, Ace and Deuce, about how classes are boring and lame. Luckily for him, his brain is much too tiny to comprehend how school systems suck everywhere, magical or not. Today, though, there's a seemingly special event at the cafeteria. A famous bakery is selling their products, and they're so good that it runs out incredibly fast. Grim's already gone even before hearing the explanation, pushing through the crowds to get the food, which naturally lands him in trouble with some upperclassmen who want to settle this in a fight. It's a bit concerning how violent everyone in the school is. Can't we bake a cake out of smiles and flowers and just be happy? Anyway, we obliterate them. Grim successfully acquires a deluxe grilled cheese sandwich, much to his delight. However, someone else arrives at the cafeteria, grumbling about how he missed getting the item that he wanted. As a side note, we're technically not meant to know this character in-universe yet. But as a player, you can obviously meet him and get his card at any point past the prologue, given how the text box already has his name shown to us. Still, for the sake of narrative structure, I'll leave the proper introduction for when you meet him later in the story. Let's just focus on how this Ruggie fella seems to have a plan, spotting Grim and his unjustly won sandwich. So, Ruggie strikes up a conversation, proposing to switch the sandwich for a good old hot dog bun. Without the sausage, mind you, just the bread. Obviously, Grim doesn't accept the trade. And yet, after a sudden flash of light, we see him trading his food with Ruggie, who graciously thanks him and dips out. Yu remarks on how strange that was. I mean, Grimm would sell their entire friend group for a single corn chip. There's no way he would have willingly given up his prized sandwich. Clearly devastated, Grimm explains that he really didn't want to switch, but his body moved on his own once Ruggie extended a hand. Ace just chalks it up to a heat of the moment thing, effectively concluding the topic. For now. After all, we have more important things to worry about. Head Mage Crowley has called us for something important. Maybe he'll finally send us back home? Yeah, good joke. It probably has something to do with Riddle's breakdown. How cheerful. The scene cuts to the school's botanical garden, and Ruggie meets up with another familiar face, a lion beastman by the name of Leona. It seems that he was the one to request the deluxe sandwich from the cafeteria, just because it's so hard to acquire, and immediately establishing himself as a bit of a jerk. Ruggie states that, unlike him, who will eat anything that hasn't gone bad, Leona is a lot more picky, given that he's a prince. That's right, everyone, this is yet another not at all subtle twist exposition scene. You'll love to see it. The Lion Man immediately corrects Ruggie, saying that actually he's second in line, and for royalty, all that matters is your order of birth. Preferably, who comes first? Hard work and talent amount to nothing if he'll never be king. And you know, I was on board so far. His comments made sense. It was the classic narrative trope of the bitter second-born royal. But then, my guy had the gall to say that he was basically a commoner. And I mean, hello? Sir, I'm pretty sure that's not how that works. Prince Harry is still an international celebrity, and he's in 5th place. You will very much be on the menu when we start eating the rich. I hope you know that. Ruggie does call him out on this, saying that Leona has a pretty warped perspective of the world, created from his life of extreme luxury. Then, he warns about a housewarden meeting that Leona has to attend soon. It's obvious that he does not want to go, but given that he's apparently the dorm leader of Savanaclaw, the least he can do is show up. Leona begrudgingly relents, but first, he has to do something much more important. Take his post-meal little catnap in the sun. I hate to say it, but that is icon behavior. He is God's sleepiest soldier after all. Well, maybe the second. Anyway, Ruggie complains a little too late, and so he is designated as Leona's ever-faithful alarm clock. The last thing we see before the scene ends is him wondering about our little group. He remembers seeing us somewhere, but where? The answer would be in Book 1. Yeah, I failed to mention this in my previous video, but there is indeed a scene during the chestnut gathering portion of the book where you accidentally stepped on Leona's tail while he slept in the botanic garden. There were some vague threats of violence as usual, but nothing more came of it. In universe, Yu still doesn't really know these two, something that I will ask you to keep in mind for later. Right, I forgot to explain. Yeah, these little signals will be scattered throughout the recap as a means to highlight certain moments that will either warrant further explanation as part of the narrative breakdown, are evidence for a bigger argument I'll present later, or are just significant for a side tangent. In summary, they're a means to indicate that this specifically is important to keep in mind. Anyway, moving on. As we return to our best first year's friends forever, we find ourselves in the head mage's office, once again meeting my most behated character of all time, Dyer Crowley. I want to hit him with a bus. He's great. In this section, Crowley gives us a proper rundown on the mechanics of overblotting. I already explained it in my previous video, so I'll summarize it here for clarity's sake. The concept of blot is essentially an in-universe way to limit the magic system. A mage burns fuel to conjure any spell, and that fuel is their magical energy, which, once used up and burnt, leaves behind the blot, a magical waste material that goes away with time. The more powerful the mage, and the bigger the spell, the more blot is accumulated. Just that in itself would be fine, a natural consequence for using too much magic. The problem comes when blot is affected by the mage's mental health. The more stressed, angry, or isolated they feel, the faster blot gathers. And once the accumulation reaches a tipping point, the mage experiences what is known as an overblot, losing control of their magic and of themselves. Overblotting is extremely dangerous because it keeps eating away at the person's magic, creating a monster of ink called Phantom, and corrupting the victim's mind. If nothing is done to save them, the mage is overtaken by the Phantom and they supposedly die? Or, well, I think the implication is that they become the Phantom or are consumed by it. Either way, it's It's basically a death sentence. How fun!
Like, I'll keep all my emotions right here, and then one day I'll die.
It's also during this explanation that we get the first mention of Ace's older brother, lovingly called Anipola, because we simply never learn his name. Yeah, a lot of the characters casually drop info about their family members or their family situation and move on without explaining it. Sometimes they'll be relevant, sometimes they will not, and that boils my brain. We know a lot about Jack's family or Rook's family, but have never seen them on screen. Same goes for Falena and Mrs. Rosehearts. I mean, we have their silhouettes, but we've never seen their actual sprites in-game, and I need to have a face to the name so I can land a proper square punch. Anyway, to make sure that we understand the dangers of blot, Crowley decides to do the very sane and educational method of summoning ghosts to attack us. I'd say that has to be a violation of some sort of teacher's code, but honestly, Nyraven College is pretty consistent in its ever-present motto: violence! You learn or you die. After the battle, the boys notice how the gems of their wands are stained, but Crowley assures them that with enough food and rest, it should swiftly vanish. In Grimm's words, use magic, get blot. Blot bad. Sleep and food, good. It doesn't get simpler than that. We also learn a pretty cool piece of world building. The mage stones in the wands, staffs, or other pieces of clothing are actually very important to help regulate a magic user's ability, given that it helps in both casting the magic and in siphoning away the blot from forming within the caster's body. They're basically a warning meter to when the mage is near their limits, and I think that's pretty cool. Sadly though, this is all that Crowley can tell us. And yes, part of it is because we're all scrubs who don't have even a fraction of the significant amount of power necessary to be considered a threat. Dare I say, insulting, hurtful even, but also unfortunately true, we are pretty lame. And according to Crowley, overblots are apparently pretty rare.
実際のところ詳しいことは分かっていません。オーバーブロットについては未知数なことが多い。何せ事例がそう多くはありませんから。
事例が多くてたまるかっつーの。あんなの二度とごめんだわ。
Who's going to tell him? Crowley concludes his special lesson and shoos the group back to class. But of course, Yu counters with a good old
Take me home.
The bird bastard assures us that he's been working so hard to find a way to take us back home. Pinky promise, guys. But right now, he's so busy. With what, you might ask? Why, the October Interdorm Spell Drive Tournament, of course. I like your funny words, Magic Man. Yu and Grimm don't know what the heck that means, and Ace is surprised for some reason, even though Yu is literally not from this dimension, my dude. But actually, this is in line with Grimm's role of being a good old microphone, receiving exposition from the characters given that he, like Yu, has no idea what anyone is talking about ever. Get ready to enter a third consecutive string of exposition, this time about Spell Drive. I'm sensing a pattern here. Now, I'm not gonna explain Spell Drive in a lot of detail because, frankly, outside of the Olympics, I really don't have the brain power to try and understand sports, fictional or otherwise. If you want to learn all the intricacies about it, the user Those Lethal Arts on Tumblr made a whole post dedicated to breaking down the rules of the game and how it's played in universe. Go check them out, the link will be in the description. For the purposes of this video though, just know that Spell Drive is apparently pretty similar to real-world football, only that you also need magic and only 7 teammates to play. Supposedly, this upcoming tournament is a really big event, attracting quite a large audience, including professional league recruiters. And, given that it's all televised, the flashier your magic is during the game, the more likely you and your team will be of catching the attention of some bigwig, becoming either professional players after graduation or some other fancy career that also needs powerful magic. Crowley says that Nyraven College has produced plenty of successful players, being one of the leading schools in the sport, and the winning team basically becomes celebrities for a short amount of time. Grimm hears of this and, of course, is determined to participate. When he wins, you'll have speedrun through becoming a legendary, world-famous mage in no time. Sadly, our ramshackle dorm is not even considered for the tournament. We don't have 7 members or proper magic. We have ghosts, a human, a cat, and a dream. And that's against the rules. So we're out. Boo! With these expositions finally over, Crowley must be off for his very important business. The scene changes, and we're finally at the House Warden meeting. This section is pretty long, so I won't narrate it beat for beat, but it essentially serves as a way to introduce all of the House Wardens that we saw during the prologue again, showing how they interact with one another and giving some insight into their superficial, simpler dynamics, like how Kalim casually talks about him and Leona being VIPs, or Iria judging everyone for wanting to appear on TV, or Vil talking about his makeup, or Riddle and Azul disagreeing over changing the rules for profit. It's very much a character tropes 101 kind of reintroduction, but it helps to endear the player to these characters again, and to capture our attention, especially given the importance of the next discussion, what to do about the House Warden of Diasomnia, Malleus Draconia. Apparently, ever since he enrolled, Malleus has been decimating every dorm in the competition without a second glance, making almost 90% of the dorm's perfect 100-point score. According to Crowley, that ends up being quite the problem, given how important it is for the regular students to perform well in the tournament and get good career prospects from the recruiters in the audience. Thus, Crowley's proposition is that Malleus's name be put into the Spelldrive Hall of Fame, essentially making him one of the big historical legends of the sport, and consequently disqualifying him from the competition before he even sets a foot on the field. It's honestly a reasonable proposition. It wouldn't be rude to Malleus, it wouldn't offend the Briar Valley Kingdom, of which Malleus is just casually the prince of. Small detail, I'm sure. It wouldn't damage the Diasomnia team's formation, and it wouldn't lead to another disgraceful performance from the other players going against Powerhouse Draconia. It would be a win-win all around, a perfectly agreeable solution. So of course, people object to it. And by people, I mean Leona specifically. If there's one thing Leona apparently hates, is being told that he can't win before the fight even starts. Sure, Savanaclaw is especially affected by Malleus' performance, given how many of its members wish to pursue athletic careers. And yet, the dorm was disqualified very quickly against Diasomnia for the last 2 years. But Leona refuses to accept a handicap, or take the easy way out. Spelldrive isn't just a game of power and magic, it's also a game of wits and strategy. The other leaders might not be able to outsmart Malleus, but Leona claims that he certainly can. He goes on a whole speech about how the King of Beasts from the Great Seven won his throne because of his cunning and persistence. So, he encourages everyone else to come up with a way to beat Malleus and take his spot as the reigning victor.
グレートセブンの百獣の王も努力と知恵で王の座を勝ち取った。お前らも頭絞って考えろよ。あの化け物に勝つ方法をもし勝てたなら、そのチームを世界中が称賛するだろうぜ。千載一遇のチャンスをミス逃すのか。
Leona masterfully appeals to the naturally competitive side of this bunch of violently competitive teenagers, and all of them end up denying Crowley's proposal. Well, except Idia. He was fully on board to ban the very cracked and OP build that Malleus plays with. Alas, no one cares about what Idia thinks, my pathetic, beloved, wet cat of a man. Speaking of cats, this is a pretty significant moment for the Catman's character, since it shows some core traits of his personality going forward, his ability to read people and to use his charisma. Leona is able to convince a room filled with some of the most stubborn people in this side of Twisted Wonderland, and Kalim, to play along with his schemes, and he does all of that as easily as having a catnap. He appeals to what he needs to inspire in them in order for them to not interfere with his plan. And if it weren't for some glaring plot issues that this book introduces later on, this would be a perfectly fine scene. Alas, I will need to pin it for further discussion, because some of the strongest aspects shown here are also what breaks the book later on. Anyway, Crowley begrudgingly accepts their decision. With the Malleus matter settled, the other house wardens are free to... Wait a minute. This is a house warden meeting. Why isn't Malleus here? Oh, they forgot to invite him. Oh, that poor lizard boy. I sure hope this light-hearted reoccurring joke doesn't secretly have some very sad implications for his character and future arc.
Could you excuse me?
As this chapter ends, we get a scene with some ominous music, following two NPC students talking about the upcoming tournament. One of them even mentions a new spell that he came up with that even left Professor Kroll impressed. Then, all of a sudden, the same student slips and falls down the stairs, hurting his ankle. His friend hurries him to the infirmary, but not long after, we see a totally not obviously obscured character sprite, mysteriously shadowy figure, laughing in the corner. There's a clip of some blood accumulation, and the scene ends. Anyway, wanna go play football with ghosts? Yeah, when we come back to our protagonist duo, Grim is whining and complaining about not being able to play in the tournament, so the ghosts try to cheer him up by playing around with him in the dorm backyard, as they apparently also played for Nayraven College when they were alive. This whole section is pretty cute, and it helps to build this slow-burn friendship between you, Grim, and the ghosts, while also giving us a bit of their backstory, which is something that I know for sure at least a few of the fans care a lot about. But in terms of the plot, this is mostly filler, likely as a way to fill the twist tune quota for the book. The song is also just okay. Honestly, all of the songs in Book 2 are pretty mid, but I'm getting ahead of myself. To get us back on track, the main plot literally comes knocking at our door in the form of Headmate Crowley. He has a request for us. Apparently, there's been a string of suspicious accidents happening in the school over the last few days, which all end up with students getting hurt. They're nothing deadly, mostly just falling down the stairs or getting injured while cooking, and yes, it could be just the students being distracted due to the upcoming tournament, but all the victims were also powerful contenders for their dorm spell drive teams, meaning that a bunch of talented players suddenly started getting hurt out of nowhere, right before the tournament. Now that smells pretty fishy, and Crowley agrees, but he doesn't have any proof pointing to a possible culprit, so he needs our help to investigate this matter further. Naturally, we refuse to do it. Well, Grim refuses. He doesn't really care about helping people he doesn't know, and it's not like he can participate in this dumb tournament anyway, so why should he bother doing any free labor?
Let me pretend I care. Okay, I'm done.
Crowley was likely expecting this sort of answer, given the type of children that he has to take care of every day, which is why he mansplains and manipulates his way into convincing Grim to take the job, by offering us the chance to actually join the tournament as a proper dorm. Now, isn't he just so kind?
私優しいので
Immediately swayed by the offer, Grim accepts, and our protagonist duo are now the detectives on the case. What follows is a little segment of you and Grim going around interviewing the injured students for more details. Both in the manga and in the game, this part shows a pretty cute side of their dynamic, with both of them playing into this sort of role very seriously, and Game U even has some funny dialogue options to pick from. Though, in terms of actual evidence, they don't really get much. The incidents seem like regular accidents one would get in a magical, deadly school.
What happened?
Once we're back in Ramshackle, we come across a familiar face, our pal Ace. He doesn't really say why he's here, and when Grim tries to shoo him away due to how busy we are, he courteously asks what's up. Yu explains the situation, but before Ace can add any theories to the pile, Deuce comes running in, saying that they got a big problem. Trey just fell down the stairs. Gasp! Trey fans, please rise up. We have to defend our boy, come on.
She's an icon, she's a legend, and she is the moment. Now come on now.
Rushing over to the Heartslabyul dorm, we find Trey with Kater in their shared room, the latter greeting us with a cutesy nickname. The translated text uses a poker term, but you can hear the Japanese voice line is saying a deuce when referring to, well, Ace and Deuce, which is funny when you consider that that's their fandom ship name.
横着しないでください
No, it's too gay in here.
Speaking of ships, if you want a breakdown of some popular Twist ships, check out my Shipping Zone video about that. More coming soon in the future. Anyway, Trey is alive and as fine as he can be. He just messed up his ankle a bit, so he'll need to use crutches for a while, plus he won't be able to participate in the tournament. Grim, in one of my top 3 favorite moments from him, gives Trey a can of tuna to encourage him to get better soon. He is so stinking cute. Our commotion draws a bit of attention though, and who else enters the room but House Warden Riddle himself. He scolds us a bit, saying that Trey should be resting and that he doesn't need people bothering him. And then he immediately starts fussing over for Trey and asking if he needs anything to eat or drink. You big hypocrite! According to Riddle, it's his fault that Trey ended up getting hurt, and when pressed on the matter, he reveals that actually, Riddle was the one to slip down the stairs, but Trey saved him, taking the fall instead. How very heroic of Trey, truly commendable. I applaud his efforts to save our tyrant lad. That being said, thanks to how extremely dramatic the manga made this scene, I cannot take it seriously anymore. I'm so sorry, Trey.
Is it me? Am I the drama? I don't think I'm the drama.
But now we know for sure that something weird is going on, and Cater seems to know that we know, given how he promptly kicks everyone out of the room so Trey could rest. In reality, he just wanted to hear our schemes away from Trey's poor injured ears. This is a great moment to remind the audience how Cater is a lot more socially aware than he might come across, being able to read the room and casually redirect a serious conversation to a proper setting. He is just that good. After getting Riddle and Cater up to speed, they agree with our suspicions, having some of their own as well. Riddle confirms that he didn't feel some external force push him or some wind magic trying to knock him down. Instead, his body just moved on his own, just like every other victim said. Gee, I wonder why that is. Regardless, it's still unclear how the culprit is doing this, but Riddle intends to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, joining the investigation team alongside Cater. Ace and Deuce jump at the opportunity to join as well, though their intentions aren't so selfless. They're very openly aiming for Trey's empty spot in the Heartslabyul team. Guys, at least let the man's corpse get cold before you celebrate. Sheesh.
Oh, she passed away? Oh. All right.
With our detective agency steadily increasing, we decide to plan ahead and figure out the attacker's next target, using Cater's online stalking skills to our advantage. Once they make their move, we'll be there to kick them into next Tuesday. Bodily harm, the best way to teach children. Our first stop is at Pomefiore, where one Rook Hunt resides, my most beloved. According to Riddle, he's an exceptional player, though he may be a tad odd. I think that's putting it mildly, but at last, it's not his time to shine yet. We get a cute scene with Rook and Vil and Apple before... Wait, we're already going? But we just got here! At least let me say goodbye! Book 5 is so far away! No! Oh well, the next set of characters is also great. We go after the twins, Jade and Floyd Leach. Once again, my beloveds. I know I say that about every character, and I do mean it. I love them all. Riddle, however, is not a fan, especially of Floyd. But he also doesn't seem convinced that the culprit would target those two, given that they're, f***ing insane. Floyd spots our very inconspicuous group in our probably inadequate stalking spot, and the twins assume that we're spying on their dorms for the tournament. They would know about stalking people in order to find a weakness, wouldn't they? Deciding that it would be a bad idea to engage these two in a fight, we elect to perform a tactical retreat, fleeing to the school's main street. The group reaches a collective agreement that the culprit, just like us, would have likely steered clear of those two very scary fish. So, it's time to move on to another candidate, Jack Howl, from Savanaclaw. Unfortunately, it's also gotten pretty late, and Riddle wants to return to the dorm to ensure that no one's breaking the rules while he's away. Grimm disappointedly remarks how he thought Riddle changed his tyrannical ways, but it turns out that he's still as strict as ever, to which Riddle takes great offense to. He's a lot more lenient these days. Cater even backs him up. It's just a matter of habit, actually. But to be honest, it does make perfect sense. No one changes so drastically right away. Let the boy take his time. I'm still proud of him. Anyway, after parting ways with Riddle, we finally get to make our way to the title dorm of this book, Savanaclaw, on episode 12 out of 31. Arriving at the dorm, we're quick to spot our target. Jack Howl is a wolf beastman with a build that doesn't help to convince me of the fact he's supposed to be 16 years old. But hey, this is anime logic, so I'll let it slide. We tell Jack that someone might try to hurt him, and that working together, we can overcome anything.
単刀直入に言うと、次に狙われそうな選手候補をマークして、犯人が現れるのを待とうって作戦です。どう？ちょっと俺たちに協力してくんないかな？
断る。俺は一人で何とかできるし、お前らに守ってもらう必要はね。
Oh, well... Oh, okay. I can handle rejection. This is fine. Just give me a moment.
I was rooting for you! We were all rooting for you! How dare you!
Yeah, so Jack doesn't want anything to do with us, saying that he doesn't like the aspect of working in a group, and that he doubts he's gonna be a target.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
So, after being abandoned by the person we were meant to help, our group is then approached by other members of the dorm, who immediately get angry, thinking that we're invading their turf. Have I mentioned that everyone in this school is alarmingly quick to think the worst of people? They're about to jump us when a voice stops them in their tracks. Our knight in shining armor is none other than Leona, swiftly followed by Ruggie. Grim recognizes him as the grilled cheese burglar, and kudos to the translation team, that was a great pun. And he properly introduces himself as Ruggie Bucchi. Meanwhile, Leona recognizes us, because we are the herbivores that step on his tail all the way back in book 1. This means that, finally, we have been properly introduced to all of the important Savanaclaw characters. So let's take this moment to pause and talk about the Disney character inspirations for this group. Like I mentioned, the Savanaclaw dorm is based on the Lion King movie, so it's easy to figure out the most obvious parallels, like Scar. He is obviously the main inspiration behind Leona, both in design and in narrative. As for Ruggie, the agreed upon consensus is that he's not inspired by one specific hyena character, being instead a representation of that entire group of secondary villains, fulfilling the role of partner in crime to the main antagonist, aka Leona. So far so good, all neat and tidy. And finally, we have Jack, who... Now hold on, something isn't right here. Give me a moment. Hey, there's no wolves in the Lion King. What the heck? Is this allowed? So then, what is Jack supposed to be? Who are you, Jack?
Wait a minute! Who are you?
This has been a debate in the Twist fandom ever since the game launched. People quickly realized that, unlike 90% of the cast, who either had clear villain inspirations or were at least a vague reference to a minor character within the dorm's established origin movie, Jack has always been the odd one out. We do have some memorable wolves in the Disney movie catalog, like the ones from Jungle Book or from Beauty and the Beast, but a lot of people thought that Jack was meant to represent the most famous villain wolf from fairy tales, the Big Bad Wolf, and that would have been a valid theory. The only problem being, Disney hadn't done a Red Riding Hood movie by the time of his creation, so I really doubt that was the main source of inspiration for Jack. Other theories also pointed fingers at the Beast, due to his unique magic name, but the Beast wasn't exactly a villain, was he? He was just an entitled jerk, so he also wouldn't really fit. That's why most people nowadays just assume that, just like Ruggie, Jack is supposed to be a representation of the wolf pack that attacked Belle. Technically, if you take into account that Jack does come from the snowy areas of the Shaftlands, which is Twist's stand-in for Europe, it could fit that theory. Though, if I could throw my own hat into the ring, I think that the Twist team needed to fill all the tropes that a standard gacha game requires for its main cast. And while creating a tough guy with a secret soft side, who is also incredibly loyal to the leader of the dorm, the image of a big dog, or in this case, a big wolf, is what ended up forming in Yana's mind. Savanaclaw is made up almost entirely of beastmen, after all. It wouldn't surprise me if, in the spirit of making all characters part animal, Yana just created a mostly original character vaguely inspired by wolves. But this is just my theory. My Twist theory. The whole thing is just for the sake of curiosity, really. The character inspirations don't affect the in-game narrative, mainly serving as a source for the players to compare the actions of the characters to the OG villains. So this whole rant was pointless. Dang it!
Whoa! This is worthless.
Anyway, going back to the story, after the dorm leaders learn that we accidentally hurt their poor little baby dorm leader Leona, they demand our heads on a spike. They're just that loyal to him. Huh. Fortunately for us, maiming is prohibited on Mondays, so they settle for kicking us around on the sports field. After all, during Spell Drive, they're allowed to use magic spells against the opposing team however they like, which means they can still beat us up and be totally within the loopholes of this f***ed-up school. Again, who created this system? After another boring song, we are thoroughly wrecked, barely scoring a single point. Not only is Leona an insanely capable player, with Kater going so far as calling him a Spell Drive legend, but the entire Savanaclaw team is also incredibly well trained. This means that no one can stop Leona from enabling a one-sided beatdown of a bunch of kids, their cat mascot, and their overworked chaperone. That is, until Jack shows up again, and he's not happy about the situation, calling the whole thing a disgusting spectacle that he doesn't want to have to see.
初心者いたぶって何が楽しいんすか。
なーにジャック君、正義のヒーローみたいでかっこいいっすね。
俺はただみっともなくて見てられねえって言ってるだけっす。しらけること言うぜ。
Leona admires Jack's boldness, but also, thanks to his meddling, he gets instantly bored. Yeah, taking out one's aggression on children is way more fun when you aren't getting scolded for it. So, Leona pieces out, and after some usual threats from the other dorm members, we're also free to go. We try to thank Jack for his save, but he denies having any sort of good intentions to try and help us. You know, like a liar.
Sure, Jan.
After telling Jack to be careful, we finally returned to our dorm. This whole ordeal felt like 2 weeks of non-stop work, both for the characters and for me summarizing this. Grim is already asleep, as expected, but Yu is wide awake for some reason and decides to get some fresh air. This is when we finally meet the man, the myth, the legend, horned guy. Yeah, I can't believe that I just forgot to mention Malez in my previous video, but in my defense, I also completely forgot that he doesn't properly appear until book 2, which is such a wild decision. I mean, the guy is practically the poster child for this game, and he plays a supportive role for pretty much every book until the 7th, so I don't get why the prologue and book 1 were different from the formula. But hey, he's here now, I guess. Yippee! Malez says everyone knows who he is. I'm not gonna call him Boy with Horns until book 5. He says that he enjoyed spending time around the abandoned dorm during his walks of lonely solitude. But now that we're living here, he'll have to find someplace else. Way to make us feel bad, my guy. Sheesh, it's not like we're kicking you out. You can stare at our old gargoyles and the night cryptid outside the window all you want, you weird dragon man. He also refuses to introduce himself, claiming that it's better that we're unaware of who he truly is. For our own sake, apparently. Okay, that's not suspicious, whatever you say, pretty stranger. He does allow us to call him whatever we'd like, and this game is far too smart to not let the player choose a nickname, because it would be the Wanderer from Genshin Impact and his many silly names all over again. With that, he bids us goodbye and teleports away. Huh. Oh well, let's move on. The scene changes and we're back at Savanaclaw, this time in Leona's room. He and Ruggie are talking, with the latter saying that he got a bit of work done while grabbing dinner. Leona praises him and Ruggie replies that it's a pleasure to be of service to their cause, since all of them want to turn the world upside down. There's another Lion King reference about the hyenas working together with the King of Beasts, aka Scar, in order to improve their lot in life, and according to Ruggie, he's just doing the same thing. Leona warns him, though, to be careful on his hunts and to not leave evidence behind, but Ruggie confidently replies that hyenas pick their prey clean down to the bone. Gee, I wonder what they're talking about in such vague terms. Speaking of vague evil plans, Ruggie also asks who their next target should be, to which Leona replies,
人の話をこそこそ立ち聞きしている狼なんてのはどうだ。いるんだろ、一年坊。そんなにでけえ耳して立ち聞きとは趣味が悪いぜ。
Uh-oh, someone's in trouble. Chapter 15 is probably one of the most important parts of this book for our analysis of Leona, so I'm not gonna make too many comments just yet. Essentially, he and Jack have a discussion about the motives behind this whole scheme, with Leona telling the story of Savanaclaw's humiliating defeats 2 years in a row.
俺たちは2年連続でマレウス率いるディアソムニア領とトーナメント1回戦でぶつかった結果、初戦敗退、優勝常連。敵を力でねじ伏せてきたサバナクロ領がまるで目も開いてねえ子猫みたいなありさまだった。その無様な姿が全世界に放映されちまったわけだ。結果どうなったと思う？領長は無能の烙印を押され、サバナクロ領政へのプロリーグや一流企業からのスカウトはゼロになった。
Jack argues that they lost because they weren't good enough, and Leona, surprisingly, agrees, saying that they didn't even come up with a plan last year. It was obvious they wouldn't have won like that. Jack bites back though, saying that cutting down their opponents this year is rather cowardly, and Leona's response to this is interesting.
間違ってる、ジャック。俺はな、お前たち両生のことを一番に考えてやってるんだぜ。マレウスを打ち破り、今までの雪辱を果たせば世間のサバナクロー領への評価は回復するだろう。今年勝てなければマレウスは殿堂入り選手になることが決まってる。 これが最後のチャンスなんだ。それをてめえは安い正義感で潰すって。お前は先輩たちの未来を台無しにしたいのか。それは頭を使って獲物を追い込むのは狩りの基本だ。卑怯でも何でもねえ。
In the context of Night Raven College's system, their arguments kinda make sense. Not only does this school favor ruthless tactics, with even the educators playing some rather risky gambles with student safety, but this whole tournament is also a setup in a way that favors those with elevated magical skill, neglecting to find ways to even the field for those that are more comfortable in other areas of magic or physical prowess. So, the only person that could pose any sort of challenge to Meleus and his team would be Leona himself. That is, if he got serious about it, as Jack puts it. He starts to say how he'll never forget the way Leona played 3 years ago, but the lion angrily cuts in.
新入りが知った口を聞くんじゃねえ。本気を出せ。バカバカしい。本気になったところで何も変わらねえよ。失せろ。明日の朝日が拝みたいなの。
So, things sure got tense around here. Leona offers to take care of Jack since he might become a problem. But Leona brushes off the offer, remarking that Jack doesn't have any proof, but also that it would be a terrible waste of talent, implying that he does recognize the younger man's potential, despite his harsh words. At the end, he mutters something about Jack talking as if he was better than him, and we get a clip of blood accumulation. I wasn't kidding when I said this chapter has a lot for us to talk about, both regarding character motivations as well as the game's approach to this narrative and how the two versions tackled it. So mark this with the biggest pin for later, and let's continue on.
That's a surprise tool that can help us later!
And the following day, after another ominous Disney dream, we tell Grimm about the encounter with the mysterious horned stranger, whom Grimm promptly dubs Hornton, or Tsunotaro in Japanese. Not the cute nickname for the most powerful eldritch fae of the realm. They're already such besties. Sure hope nothing heartbreaking happens between them in the future. Speaking of heartbreak, we run into Riddle and Cater on the way to class, and Riddle panders to all the shoujo fans by cutely fixing our tie. Twist may not be a dating sim, which I am ever so thankful for, but these little moments are admittedly very cute. This is how YuuRei can still win, baby! We're informed that another incident happened the previous night, likely the target Ruggie mentioned on the way to grab dinner. The victim this time is a student from Scarabia, so we rush to the cafeteria to talk to them. They turn out to be Jamil Viper, who is, and say it with me now, also my beloved. He's accompanied by Kalim, the house warden of Scarabia and my precious baby boy, who greets us rather cheerfully, a breath of fresh air in this angry cesspool of a school. Jamil recounts the details of his accident, telling us that while he was cooking up something for Kalim, his knife hand went suddenly haywire and ended up slicing his other hand. Kalim remarks how he found it odd, given Jamil's extraordinary culinary skills, and the latter speculates that he was manipulated by someone's signature spell.
ほとんどの奴らはそう思うだろうが、俺にはあの感覚に少し覚えがある。おそらくユニーク魔法の一種だ。
You remember what those are, right? Little special spells unique to each individual, ranging from being insanely overpowered to weirdly specific and kinda unclear. Yeah, Jamil believes someone used one of those to magically control his movements, making it seem like he was being careless without any obvious outside interference. Riddle adds onto his hypothesis as he looks back on his own almost accident. Still, it doesn't give us much. I mean, anyone could have the ability to control other people's movements against their will, and we have no suspects. Absolutely no one at all. Isn't that right, Grimm?
なんだ急に大声出して。
俺様知ってるんだぞそのユニーク魔法を使うやつ
なんだって
What? Ruggie? He's the culprit? I had no idea. Yeah, finally, in chapter 17, the characters, at long last, reach the same conclusion that most of the players have known since chapter 6. Whoops. Better late than never, I guess. With our sights set on the potential culprits, we hurry to ambush Ruggie in the classroom, and then we ask to move to the corridor? Guys, have you never seen a crime drama? Don't give the perp an easy access to an escape route. If they're guilty, they might try to run away. You know, just like Ruggie does. Yeah, big shocker. He skedaddles away, taking Riddle's and Cater's magical pens with him so we can't lock him down. Boo. Well, time to do this the old-fashioned way then. Ace, Deuce, get the cauldron.
No! 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 Stay back!
Wait, where'd you get that piano?
After another chase twist tune, you'll be happy to know we still can't catch him. Because of course we can't. When have we ever succeeded in this game? Though I will give credit where it's due. Ruggie would be the type of slippery snail that can avoid capture as long as he wants. Plus, as he so helpfully reminds us, we literally have no solid evidence of his involvement. I mean, he did run away, so I'm pretty sure I could use my gaslighting powers to convince Crowley. We should at least try. But, since no one ever listens to me, Ruggie walks away, making us look all the more pathetic in the process. Great job, gang! We're soon approached by Jack, who's surprised we're still pursuing this case. He asks why we're going through all this trouble for a bunch of strangers, but Ace and Deuce clarify they don't really give a shit about pursuing justice or avenging Trey. I'm sorry, buddy, I still love you! They are just willingly pursuing this for their own personal goals. What great friends! Jack says he couldn't trust people who would suffer like this for strangers, and seems relieved that we're all kind of selfish jerks. This moment for Jack has always felt a bit interesting to me, but I'll explain more in his analysis section. For now, he wants us to fight him, because I guess speaking through fists is faster than simply using your words. And this is the only school where violence is actively encouraged to determine if you can trust people. At least Deuce is hyped about it. Good for him. After we wipe the floor with his face, Jack creates an unbreakable bond with our group and finally spills the beans. He doesn't feel great about betraying his dorm, but he just can't take it anymore. Go on, King. Speak your truth.
どんなに強い相手だろうが、自分自身の力で挑んでこその勝負だろう。今回の大会だって、俺は自分がどこまでやれるのか挑戦するつもりで自分を鍛えてきた。卑怯な小細工なんてヘドが出る。そんな勝利に何の意味がある。俺は自分自身の力で勝ち上がっててっぺん取ってやりたかったんだ。
あ、こいつすげえめんどくさいやつだ。
Yeah, we can work on that empathy later, okay, bud? Jack reveals the details of Ruggie's signature spell, Laugh With Me, where it essentially controls someone's body to mimic Ruggie's movements, making it seem like an accident on the target's part. On the tier of useful, unique magics, this one is pretty high up, I'll give him that. Deuce raises the question of how suspicious it would look if Ruggie was openly moving to make someone fall down the stairs. But Jack explains that he wasn't doing this alone. Most of the Savanaclaw dorm was involved in the scheme, forming a giant muscle wall in front of Ruggie when he needed to do the spell and later escape. The motives for the dorm members are pretty obvious. They need to perform well at the tournament. But Jack has some rather strong feelings about that.
将来よりも今だろ。今の自分の実力を見せつけなきゃ意味ねえだろうが。俺が特に気に入らねえのは寮長レオナ・キングスカラーだ。あいつはすごい実力があるはずなのにちっとも本気を出しゃしねえ。
確かにあいつダラダラしてるのにめちゃくちゃ強かったんだぞ。
だろ。せっかく持っている力をなぜ磨かない。俺はそういうやつが一番嫌いだ。3年前レオナ先輩が大会で見せたプレーは本当にすごかった。だから俺はこの学園に入れてサバナクロー寮に入ってあの人とガチでマジフトの試合がやれるんだと思ってたのに。
As it turns out, Jack is a big fan of Leona and admires him a lot, which is really unfortunate considering that the guy is going through his biggest flop era. Sure, their dorm is at rock bottom, but here comes Leona with a shovel. Their biggest and final target is obviously Melez, whom I would like to imagine is just staring at gargoyles, none the wiser about this whole drama happening because of his own power. What an unbothered king. Cater and Riddle show up having heard everything, and start to devise a plan to catch Leona in the act. But Jack refuses to participate, saying that he's gonna settle this on his own. His dorm, his problem. Well, so much for an unbreakable bond. Yule calls him out on the fact that he will definitely lose trying to take on his entire dorm alone. The most successful wolves hunt in packs after all. This convinces Jack to give our merry band a chance. And so, we begin to scheme our own shenanigans. The scene then transitions to the Savanaclaw dorm lounge, where Leona chastises Ruggie about his little chase with us, before they start discussing their final touches to their plan. One of the dorm members says something about the position of king in the Sunset Savanna, and that prompts an interesting response from Leona.
実力と血統は違うんだよ。なんでもねえよ。 俺はもう寝る。お前らも散れ。
Oh well, no time to delve into that now. We have to put our game face on for the long-awaited
tournament
that's apparently happening today? So if I understood this right, it would mean that Book 2 takes place over the course of only 3 days? I mean, that is insane, considering they've all barely started the school year and just had an overbought incident. But regardless, we follow the Octa Trio as they manage the merchants and attendees and fancy economy numbers. They also have a fun little chat about how a certain client of Azul's asked for the player's procession to be changed to an usually more crowded path, making the way to the stadium rather difficult to get through. Jade immediately pieces together that this has something to do with the magic boosting potion that Azul was cooking up the previous day, and the three of them gleefully bask in the chaotic evil knowledge that they all hold. Finally, the announcer calls the players to head to the stadium, starting with the winning team of the previous year. Man, those sure are some pretty detailed NPCs, huh? While all of this goes down, Ruggie is hiding in the crowd, and after drinking Azul's potion, he feels his magic power drastically increase. The effect only lasts for 30 seconds, but that's plenty enough time for what he has to do.
気を取り直して行くっすよ俺のとっておき魔法さあヌーの群れみたいにみんなで走れラフウィズミー
With his signature spell capacity enhanced, Ruggie creates a giant, unstoppable stampede of people, and they rush at the Diasomnia players, crushing them and Meleas in the process. Fly high, King. You died as you lived.
She passed away? Oh. Alright.
Back in the Savanaclaw dorm, everyone is celebrating the success of their evil genius scheme. That is, until some people decided to be a bunch of party poopers.
伝統ある試合を汚す行為幻覚をモットーとするハーツラビル寮の寮長として見逃すわけにはいかない
あのなお坊ちゃん方正義のヒーローごっこはよそでやってくれないが
わざわざ敵の真っ只中に少人数で乗り込んでくるなんて酔っちゃってるっすね
Now guys, I can see there's some tension brewing here, but if we all stay calm and talk it out, oh god dang it. Anyway, regardless of how much we fight them, it doesn't matter, because we're too late to save the poor, innocent, faceless Diasomnia characters. Or were we?
ほほう。それは興味深い話じゃ。
誰が手遅れだと？この通り。俺たちディアソムニア寮の戦士には怪我一つない。そいつらのおかげでな。
Get fucking pranked, you clowns. Heartslabyul remembered that they have someone who can literally make clones, so they used Decatur's shadow jutsu as a decoy and ensured that Meleas was perfectly safe. Apparently, he was even using his magic to help guide all the civilians to safety, which confirms that he can use magic on normal people or around normal people as long as it's not lethal. Huh. With his plan thoroughly foiled, Leona gives up.
なあ、もういい。やめだやめ。
レオナさん。
Yeah, he doesn't whine or make a fuss or show a tantrum or even try to gaslight us about it, which would be my default tactic, if I'm being honest. He just throws in the towel. And that does not go well with all the other dorm members who are relying so much on his guidance, especially Ruggie.
そんなマレウスはともかく他寮の有力選手はみんな潰してきたじゃないですかなのにレオナさんが出ないなんて3位にだってなれるかどうか俺たちの夢はどうなるんすか
He needed this win probably more than anyone. He needed to seize the opportunity for a better future for him and for his family, even if it was achieved through underhanded methods. He didn't care. Ruggie needed this to work, which is why he supported Leona so much and did all his dirty work. And what does Leona give him in return?
キャンキャンうるせえな。じゃあ本当のことを教えてやるよ。お前はゴミだめ育ちのハイエナで、俺は永遠に王になれない。嫌われ者の第二王子。何をしようか。それが覆ることは絶対にねえ。
Yikes. That's rough, buddy. Unsurprisingly, everyone starts turning against Leona, who's just about had it with this whole mess, and activates his own signature spell, King's Roar. It basically turns everything he touches into sand, which is metal as hell, I'm not gonna lie. But things immediately turn sour when people start drying up and cracking into pieces of sand, with poor Ruggie being at the forefront of this magic assault.
どうだラギー、苦しいかよ。口の中が乾いちまってお得意のおべっかも使えねえか。
You better stop!
That's it, Leona. You messed with the wrong Brazil-adopted fictional character. Brazilians, assemble. With the help of a very big dog, courtesy of Jack's signature spell, Unleash Beast, we managed to collar the feral cat and stop his litter box from being made out of people. Hooray! What follows is a ruthless verbal beatdown of Leona, with Lilia landing some pretty intense burns, despite having no screen time whatsoever up to this point. He shows up, berates Leona, and dips out, which ends up being unironically hilarious actually.
お主は持って生まれた才や順序のせいで王になれぬと嘆いておるようだが、報われぬからと怠惰に生き、思惑が外れれば進化に当たり散らすその強量さ、その程度の器で王になろうなどと、我らが王マレウスと張り合おうなどと笑わせる。たとえマレウスを倒したとて、その腐った心根を捨てぬ限り、お主は真の王にはなれんだろうよ。
As for Leona, he responds to this in a very sane, calm, and demure manner, I'm sure. See?
急速にレオナの魔力が高まって魔法封じが持続できない。
違う、これは魔力ではない。この邪悪な負のエネルギー。
Oh, that's not good.
俺は生まれた時から意味嫌われ、居場所も未来もなく生きてきた。どんなに努力しても絶対に報われることはない。その苦痛が、絶望がお前らにわかるか。
Wrong.
Unsurprisingly, Leona overblots. Though, actually that's not true. I've seen at least a few people say that they were surprised that Leona really was the overblottee of Book 2, given that, unlike Riddle, he doesn't really make much use of his magic until the very end, which is a whole other discussion I'll save for later. Right now, we have to defeat him with the power of friendship and overpower late-game gacha cards, because the best way to deal with a mental breakdown caused by years of repressed feelings is the violence of the friends we made along the way. Aww. Now eat this, sucker! Once Leona's pathetically defeated, we get to hear his traumatic backstory, which I am going to skip for now until I get to his character section. Look, it just makes things easier, okay? I know me, and I know that if I even look at that depressing as hell flashback, I am going to yap for 5 more pages and completely lose focus. So, chop chop, snap out of it, Lion Man, we have 3 more episodes to cover. We brutally force a confession out of a barely conscious Leona, and hooray, the day is saved. Now we can finally play in this dumb tournament. And speaking of the tournament, due to, you know, all of the crimes and bodily harm, Crowley is about to disqualify the Savanaclaw dorm from participating, until Biddle stops him. Hey look! Trey is alive! He's had such little presence in this book thanks to his injury, the poor guy. That must be why he's after some good old petty revenge. Huh, as if someone in this school would ever let go of a grudge. Trey and the other victims ask Crowley to allow Savanaclaw back into the tournament, so the dorm can be absolutely beaten to shit by every other team. Because, like we said before, magic attacks and bodily harm are fair game if you're playing Spell Drive. How has this game not been banned? Leona, of course, accepts their challenge, still managing to feel rather cocky despite all the horrors that just happened in the last 10 minutes. Crowley is also more than happy to comply with this request, since it will ensure that this insanely dangerous and potentially fatal incident will be kept under wraps from the general public and from the Magical Skill Education Board. Who, by the way, needs to shut down this place fast because, oh my god, I'm surprised more kids aren't dying or being buried in our backyard. Or are they? And hey, on the topic of kids dying, remember when Leona almost turned Ruggie into sand? Yeah, whatever happened to that conversation?
俺、あんたのこと許したわけじゃねえからな。
ああ、そうかよ。
でも、なんですかね。そんな風に情けない顔したあんたは見たくねえなって思っちゃうんすよね。あんたはいつもみたいにふんぞり返ってニヤニヤしてる方がお似合いっす。こんな風に、そら、ラフビズミー。
ラギ。
おい、一回あんかにこれやってみたかったんさ。
今すぐやめろ。
何やってんだ、あんたら。
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, okay, that's fine. I felt like getting stabbed in the lungs today. Everything's fine. This is great. They make me feel ill.
I can't. Get out.
Grimm demands our compensation for catching the culprits of the cases, but since Crowley is a backstabbing lying bitch, he never really meant to allow us to play in the official games. Best he can do is gaslight us into a shabby exhibition match at the beginning, and Grimm falls for it, hook, line, and sinker. This poor cat. Granted, with the assistance of a Deuce and our lovely ghost roommate, we're set to compete against Savanaclaw, because why pass up the free opportunity to beat them up as well? Before we go though, Crowley casually asks if anyone has spotted a strange black stone lying around. When no one gives him a proper answer, he just brushes off the question and hurries us along to the Colosseum, where we get our final twist tune of the book. You know, the song is a bit forgettable, but at least everything turned out great, and we're having fun with our friends, and everything is gonna be all...
Hey, you. You're finally awake.
Yu wakes up in the infirmary after being brutally knocked out by Grimm and a magic disc to the head. I'm going to assume it was a very weak and slow throw, because otherwise there's no way we wouldn't have gotten a giant concussion. Thanks, Grimm, you absolute menace. Because of this, we unfortunately didn't get to see anything of the actual tournament, the very event that was built up during the entire book. So that's certainly a choice. But hey, all of our friends, plus Leona and Ruggie, are all here to give us the fun details, so it's almost like we didn't miss anything at all. Well, we sorta did miss out on seeing the legendary Malleus Draconia in action, taking names and kicking ass. Oh well, better luck next time, I guess. Not that it has anything to do with us, I mean, who's Malleus Draconia, am I right? Everyone's confidently talking about giving it their all next year, and the Savanaclaw gang is seemingly on good terms, casually interacting as if they weren't at each other's throats just a few hours before. Just boys being boys, I guess. Speaking of boys...
Boom. A child.
くそ。うるせえのが来た。
レオナ、王子。
この毛玉は、兄貴の息子のチェか。俺の甥だ。
Ah, so we found our Simba stand-in. How lovely! Kid, you better stay away from cliffs, you hear me? Jokes aside, Cheka is genuinely emotionally attached to Leona, with the former leaping rather easily into the trope of reluctant yet secretly loving caretaker, which only helps to demolish his so carefully crafted hard-ass persona even further. That's so embarrassing for him. As we fade into the finale's conclusion, we see Grimm, his back at Shackle, holding a black stone. Apparently, he kept it hidden away during Leona's recovery, but now he can finally savor it in peace. A black stone, you say? Huh. Well, minerals are part of a healthy diet, so I'm sure it's all gonna be fine. Oh, hello, foreshadowing. When did you get here?
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
We do get a final scene showing us a sneak peek of the Octavinel dorm and setting up the next arc, which will focus on the rapidly approaching exams period. Wait, really? We're already having exams? We've barely started the school year and just had a super important tournament to worry about, and now we have exams? Again, who came up with the school calendar? And who put this clown in charge?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
And with that, we can finally close the curtains on Savanaclaw and bring Book 2 to an end. So, this sure was a book. What a lovely and not at all flawed piece of the story. I'm sure the majority of the fan base really likes this arc and the way that it handles these characters. Okay, let's finally address the photogenic elephant carcass in the room and, at long last, break down Book 2. Strap in, folks. It's gonna be a bumpy ride.
Bring it on.
Twisted Wonderland.
The Twisted Wonderland fanbase can rarely agree on something. It's a tough job, to survive fandom wars, defend your favorites, and learn to read 2 different translations of the text, all in order to back up any argument. Truly, we are Mickey Mouse's strongest soldiers. And yet, a single topic has the honor of maintaining a fandom-wide agreement. That being, Book 2 is not that great. People either think that it's really bad or really boring or just not as good as the other books. And that makes the players, especially the Savanaclaw fans, feel justifiably frustrated. Because why is it that Book 2 suffers from this drastic change in quality? I mean, all the books get a normal amount of criticism, as any piece of media does. But there's a stark contrast between the other dorms and their storylines versus what Savanaclaw had to work with. Well, after some research, talking with other fans, reading the book again, and having 3 mental breakdowns, I may have some answers to this mystery. And speaking of mysteries, let's start by talking about the one this book attempts to do, and how it fails miserably at it. So, I love whodunit stories. Believe me, I do. They don't even need to be that good or super complicated. They just need to be engaging and fun to go along with for the ride. I come to you as a Benoit Blanc enthusiast, a Danganronpa superfan, an Ace Attorney enjoyer, and an AI the Somnian Files sympathizer, to ask that you believe me when I say that I'm very easily entertained by mysteries of all shapes and qualities. With all of that established, it's in good authority that I say, Book 2 is a horrible attempt at a detective story. For these sorts of narratives, there are 3 main things the reader has to wonder about: who did it, how they did it, and why they did it. Naturally, any good story has to answer all 3 before the ending, in order to not leave behind any plot holes. So, technically, you could say that Book 2 accomplishes all of those topics during its run. The real problem is when they give away such reveals, because the player knows the answers to all of these questions by chapter 6. From the get-go, it's blatantly obvious that Ruggie is the one behind the incidents. The game literally has his character Sprites do an evil laugh when the NPC guy falls. That's as obvious as it can get. As for his method, while the unique magic classification isn't brought up until much later, we basically open this book with him making Grimm move against his will in order to steal the sandwich. So the method is also pretty easy to guess from quite early on. Finally, the motive for such acts becomes rather obvious after Leona's speech during the House Warden meeting. We might not know their plans for Meleus specifically, but we're explicitly told how much this tournament means for the Savanaclaw dorm members, and how much they need this win. So yeah, plenty of motivation to go after the competition. All of this ends up robbing the player from any investment in the mystery aspect of this book, given that it really isn't one. At all. But Lily, this could have been an intentional storytelling method, I hear you say. And that's true, it could have been. After all, plenty of mysteries subvert the expectations by having the audience aware of the perpetrator and their methods, focusing instead on how they'll escape being found out by the detective, or how the characters will beat the odds and win against the culprit. Hell, Twist does something similar in Book 4, where it's made clear from the start that Jamil can't be trusted, given that he has a method of controlling people to do whatever he wants. This setup helps to increase the tension of the narrative, since the player is on the edge every time they're in Scarabia, racking their brains about how you can escape the situation. Even if the characters aren't aware of Jamil's methods or his motives, the story doesn't attempt to frame this as a regular mystery, using the helplessness of the main character to make the audience feel the same way. Book 4 is so good, I'm so sad it's gonna take years for me to get to it. All of this to say that there are plenty of ways to twist classic tropes for the mystery genre and make the audience get invested in the success of both perpetrator and detective, especially if they're following their journey simultaneously as playable characters. Given how Twist doesn't make Yuu's presence necessary to play out a scene, they could have easily split Book 2's narrative between two perspectives, the detective team and the Savanaclaw team. This would certainly help to raise the narrative stakes, given the tournament's deadline. Who would be successful in time for the event? Would the detective team be able to save the targets before they were hurt, or would the perpetrators change tactics once they knew about the investigation? Not only would this method help with the audience investment on both ends, it would also give the player plenty more time to spend with the main crew of the dorm and learn more about them, which in turn would help to build sympathy for their struggles and overall objectives, even if their methods were wrong. It's a simple change, but it could have made things a lot more coherent. Too bad that's not what happened. Twist didn't set out to subvert expectations for the narrative of Book 2. They played the mystery investigation completely straight. The player is just meant to sit and watch as the characters go all around the school chasing clues and wasting so much time for a mystery that we basically already know the answer to. The player doesn't even have a reason to get invested in Ruggie potentially getting away with it, because you have no reason to care about him at this point. A new player has spent no time with Ruggie or Leona or Jack, so they have no reason to care if they're successful or not, nor do they care about the faceless NPCs who got injured. But when Stray, a character who we are already invested in because of Book 1, also gets injured, that's when both the players and the main characters finally find a reason to care. And that only happens in Chapter 9. For reference, in Book 3 at this point, we're already trying to save our friends from their Crypto Ocean scam. If you've played an Ace Attorney or Danganronpa game, you're plenty aware of how frustrating it feels to know the answers of the case and yet have to trudge through hours of the characters being clueless to rather obvious clues in front of them, just for the sake of prolonging the story. Hey guys, have you considered asking why no Savanaclaw students were injured in these accidents? The same dorm that has the most to lose in this tournament and that has had 2 years of a festering grudge? No, we're just gonna go around getting short glimpses at future characters to pad out the runtime? Okay, cool, that's fine. I didn't want to be smart about this either. But sure. Let's say that some players really didn't see the big reveal coming, that they didn't know Ruggie was secretly behind it all along and actually got invested in the mystery. So, what's their reward? Because even if a mystery is lackluster and the investigation is painstakingly slow, that player should at least get the satisfaction of figuring out the culprit's plan and cornering them with clues to get a good old culprit breakdown at the story's climax. Right? Yeah, of course not. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the investigation plotline amounts to basically nothing in the grand scheme of things. The Heartslabyul crew figures out Ruggie did it. We chase him down in a rather anticlimactic twist tune, he rubs in our face how we have no solid evidence, and then he just runs away. Leona and Ruggie don't even get a silly Scooby-Doo scene going, and we could have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you meddling kids and your dumb cat. That's the real crime here. The plan for the tournament is solely about Malea's safety, and not actually preventing their large-scale crowd manipulation from taking place. The main impact from the Ruggie incidents is to provide an excuse for Savanaclaw to still participate in the tournament, so they can be beaten up by their victims. And while that can be a satisfying enough conclusion, it still leaves behind a bitter taste in your mouth if you were expecting anything more from the entire mystery setup. A large chunk of Book 2 is dedicated to you and crew investigating the accidents or potential targets, and while it makes for a very cute dynamic, it also takes up a lot of time for something that ends up being irrelevant to the book's overall conclusion. I mean, we end up spending more time with characters of other dorms where we could be spending time knowing about the characters from Savanaclaw. Hell, by the end of the book, the important characters that were injured are seemingly recovered enough to play against Savanaclaw. Which makes no sense, considering that they were meant to be injured enough so that they couldn't participate in the games. So how did they heal so fast?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
The only thing that apparently matters to the final plan is knowing how Ruggie's signature spell works. Anything else is basically thrown aside, which ends up giving the book this really rushed feel. And you know what else is thrown aside? The entire Spell Drive tournament. Yu gets a small dose of blunt force head trauma and gets to skip the entire thing. I understand that Twist has engine limitations for the sprites and the animations, so doing an entire tournament with limited moving models or silly chibi sprites certainly would have messed up with the tone. And I also understand that they needed an excuse to prolong the admittedly quite funny plotline of Yu never discovering who the mysterious horned boy is. But still, I can't help but find it kinda disappointing that, just like with the investigation plotline, we get no on-screen payoff to the tournament. We are simply told how awesome it was and how cool Meleus played. That's great! I wish I could have seen it though. I admit that this is a more superficial and petty criticism, and I don't know how they could have worked around it, but given how this book is already weirdly paced, once you notice this detail, it's really hard to ignore. It's as if in Book 5, they made us train for the VDC the entire book, but then after Vil's Overblot, we just passed out and woke up after the results.
That can't be it. Where's the rest of it?
Savanaclaw's story feels as if two entirely different storylines were planned separately, but then they couldn't decide on which to go with. So, somewhere along the line, it was all meshed together into the book. And if you know about the theory of Book 2's story order, it does make a bit of sense. For those unaware, an old promo image of the dorms reveals that, at some point during the planning, Savanaclaw was not meant to be the second setting of the story, but instead come right before Diasomnia, making them Book 6 instead of Book 2. Many fans believe that traces of this old planning can still be seen in the final product of the game. After all, Azul is rather relevant to the prologue alongside Riddle, which would make sense given the placement of their dorms in this old order. Meanwhile, the members of Diasomnia being so relevant in Book 2, with Lilia even being vital to Leona's Overblot, would transition seamlessly into their focus after Savanaclaw. This theory is rather popular amongst fans because it could explain why Savanaclaw feels so oddly out of place. A tournament right after the start of school, the sudden focus on Meleus and Diasomnia when they just stop appearing for the following books, a disjointed plot with a convoluted conclusion, the interaction with main cast members that rarely appear again, and so on. And given how a bit rushed Twist's 1.0 release seem, with Diasomnia cards not even being in the game yet, you can see why this sort of conspiracy theory gathers so many believers. I won't lie, it is tempting to believe in it, and imagine a different universe where the game followed the old planning instead. Not only can it be a fun what-if of how the game's story could have been, I might even make a little video about it someday, but such a scenario could have also helped to polish the writing quality of Book 2 to be on the same level as the others, since it would have given this narrative one of the things it desperately needed: more time.
Do you know you have 30 minutes? Are you kidding me? 30, yes.
One of the things I noticed when I reread Book 2 is that it's not as big as I remembered. From the prologue all the way to Book 7, the main story books have slowly but surely gotten bigger. The prologue has 20 chapters and Book 1 has 28. From there, Book 2 increased the bar a bit more with 31 total chapters. Books 3 and 4 also maintain a similar amount of parts, with 39 and 41 chapters respectively. Book 5 goes a bit off the rails with 75 chapters, but Book 6 refused to be beaten and gave us a whopping 89 chapters, the number being even bigger if we take into account the sub-chapters. Now, we're deep into Book 7, with no clue about how long it's gonna be, and I don't even have to think about how the hell I'm gonna summarize it for its eventual video in however many years. That is future Lily's problem. Thanks, asshole! With all of these numbers lined up, it's pretty wild to look back on Books 1 and 2, since they were the only main storybooks available upon the release of the game, and because of that, they had to contain all the pieces of the world so that the fanbase could, understand the story and get invested in the lore. Then, once some more books came out, the writers no longer had to waste time rehashing what the players already knew, focusing instead on furthering character journeys and conflicts. This is great because the writing quality only increased over time, but it also came at a cost, as it unfortunately left all the boring and long stretches of exposition solely at the start of the narrative. And nothing exemplifies this better than Book 2. Yes, we also got exposition dumps and not subtle dialogues during the prologue and Book 1. But you know what they also gave us? An immediate source of conflict. Because from the get-go, we already know Yuu's objective during those books. In the prologue, they want to go home, and then they want to not be expelled. And in Book 1, the plot literally comes knocking on their door in the form of Ace and his magic sealing collar. As a bonus, Ace remains with that collar during the majority of the book, constantly reminding us of Riddle's presence and his effects on the characters and the narrative, without the character needing to show up constantly. Contrast this with Book 2, where we only get the first glimpses of the main conflict in Chapter 6. The setup to said conflict is a whole other thing I'm gonna talk in just a moment, but this is roughly 18.6% of the book's entire length. and the main character isn't even aware that a conflict already exists. Yu is only approached by Crowley in the following part, after we waste even more time playing Spell Drive with ghosts. Speaking of Spell Drive, the fact that they decided to introduce an entirely new fantasy sport means that the story needs to pause everything to explain to the player how the game works and why this tournament is so relevant, which results in even more exposition dumps. So not only do we get the blood explanation and the as you know exchange between Ruggie and Leona back to back, but we also get this whole new world building aspect to understand before finally getting to the good stuff. I don't know why the writers decided to set things up this way, but I fully believe that the Spell Drive tournament would have benefited a lot from being in an event entirely focused on it, like in Beanfest. Since it wasn't though, the least they could have done is give Book 2 more time to flesh out these concepts and let the characters interact with the main antagonists of the book. Because, yeah, even though Yu finally gets involved in the main conflict during Chapter 7, they only get to meet Leona, you know, the main bad guy of the book, in Chapter 12, which is 38.7% through the book. Because of this, we end up spending very little time with him. Not we, as in the players. Anyone who has a Leona card can just set him up on the home screen and poke him until he bites their finger off.
Oi, beta beta sawaru na.
But we, as in you themselves. Book 2 has not one, not two, but a whole 3 scenes where the character interacts with Leona, or is at least in his presence, before the climax. And if you think that's too little, guess what? I lied. One of these scenes is in Book 1. This means that in the entire build-up to this overblot, the player character only sees Leona during a game of Spell Drive and at the tournament. You can see how this is a problem, right? Yeah, I know, they're technically also in the infirmary at the end, but that's already post-book climax, so I'm not counting that. In the following books, the time we spend with the overblot to-be character only increases. Well, except in Book 6, but that's a whole other can of phantom worms. And sure, Book 1 also only has 3 scenes with Yu and Riddle, but combining the constant presence of his collar and Trey's retelling of their childhood tales, the player feels like they know Riddle a lot more. The lack of time getting to know Leona directly influences how much we end up caring about his development arc. That's also why so many people believed Ruggie was going to be the one set up to overblot, since we see the consequences of his magic a lot more often, just like with Riddles in the previous book, giving Ruggie a more active presence than Leona himself. The overblot argument is something I'll discuss in more detail once I reach Ruggie's character analysis, but it's not exactly a surprise that many fans found Leona's presence lacking throughout most of the book. It also doesn't help that so many things about the way the narrative is presented unintentionally undermine what are supposed to be Leona's core character traits. Oh, he's supposed to be a cunning and intelligent guy? Okay, cool. Then explain to me why his plan makes no goddamn sense.
What will you learn? What will you learn? That your actions have consequences!
Let me break down for you what Leona's plan was. Step 1. Eliminate the competition from the other dorms by causing multiple suspicious accidents that never seem to happen to any Savanaclaw students. Step 2. Be the loudest voice opposing Malleus's retirement from the tournament. Step 3. Use a large crowd of controlled civilians to run over Malleus and either kill him or injure him enough so he won't be able to play in the tournament. Step number 4. Somehow expect that such a major incident won't immediately cancel the school tournament and not cause a giant international scandal. Step 5. Profit. Yay, you win. I don't even know from which part I should start dissecting this convoluted mess, so let me just tackle the easiest point first. Malleus can teleport. Yeah, it's literally shown in this book. He teleports away in a cloud of fairy lights. Also, I'm pretty sure he can just fly. And as far as I know, there's no mention of a secret clause in Leona's foolproof plan about them doing something to prevent Malleus from using his magic to protect himself. Sure, he can't harm innocent civilians, but there's like a bajillion other ways he could either stop the stampede or simply remove himself from the danger zone. Malleus is literally the most powerful fae and skilled magician in existence. You're telling me that he can't just summon a little ice shield around himself and wait it out like a good little hamster? Are you sure you want to go with the narrative of a bunch of normal people stomp Malleus Draconia to death? Because even if this is early on in the game, with how much they built up this guy as being insanely OP, you're already asking for a lot of suspension of disbelief. And okay, Let's pretend for a second that, for some reason, Maleas can't win against a crowd of running humans in a very open space. In that case, if Leona's best scenario did come to pass, you're telling me people would just carry on with the tournament? The Air Prince of Briar Valley dying/being severely injured wouldn't, I don't know, be a huge deal? Due to a plan that was cooked up by the second prince of the Sunset Savanna? Hello?
And you are not going to get away with it.
That is a libelous accusation, and I insist you retract it immediately. You have no proof.
No proof? You are the only person who had the list!
But other than that, you have no proof.
I know a lot of the overblood to be characters do some pretty serious acts and almost commit a bit of murder sometimes. But in most of their cases, their most extreme actions take place right on the brink of the transformation or right after it, implying that their mental state was already compromised due to the blot. Meanwhile, Leona's plan was seemingly constructed while he was sane of mind and body, which does not bode well for his characterization. They might not leave behind obvious clues, but come on, it would still look suspicious as hell.
Don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious.
This book's climax has a pretty obvious creative intent. They're referencing the stampede that killed Mufasa in the original Lion King movie. You know, a cheeky parallel to an iconic moment, like many other scenes in Twisted do. Yes, indeed, Mufasa was killed by a stampede, and he traumatized a whole generation of kids because of it. But he was an animal, and the stampede was also made out of other heavy animals. They all obeyed the laws of physics and had no magic to rely on. Mufasa was also preoccupied with first saving Simba, his son, before worrying about himself. He was in a completely rigged situation and could not escape. Meanwhile, Maleas could simply bleep out of existence and he'd win. If this was just a simple reference, it wouldn't really be a problem. But when you establish so many things in universe that could interrupt or actively prevent these critical moments from taking place, you need to realize that it's not worth sacrificing important character traits for the sake of a cheap reference. Because in the end, all of this ends up making Leona just look kinda dumb, unlike the supposed genius that the narrative wanted to build him as. And as someone who wants so bad for Leona to finally get his win, this made me incredibly frustrated when I reread book 2. Not only is Leona stripped away from the smart he's supposed to have, he's also missing something that is arguably even more vital to being a proper Scar counterpart: the villainous charm.
She's an icon, she's a legend, and she is the moment.
Scar is iconic not because he's just a sassy, mean old lion who made a lot of people discover new things about themselves, but also because he was able to captivate the audience and the characters with his insane levels of charisma. Scar's entire song consists of him easily manipulating the legions of hyenas to remain loyal to him and his cause. And while we do have a similar scene with Leona by making him give the speech to the house wardens, we don't really get anything else towards anyone else. We have no scenes showing why the members of Savanaclaw are loyal to Leona, to the point of willingly getting involved in this very questionable and risky scheme. I mean, sure, they're teenagers attending a school built on a questionable moral code, but still, being able to convince an entire dorm of teen boys to do what you want is arguably an even greater feat of professional gaslighting, gatekeeping, and girl bossing than just smooth-talking 5 boys and an old birdman. I would have been content with even just a flashback of Leona approaching one of the dorm members that was unsure of this plan. Maybe they didn't think it was right, or maybe they didn't think it would work. And then we could have seen Leona using his wit and charm to convince the students that taking down this one guy would be for the greater good of the entire dorm and their own future. But no. Instead, we get Leona making vague threats of violence, and that's it. Why waste time stalking Rook and the Leech brothers when we could have dedicated that time to building up our villain antagonist? Am I right?
But you did this for what? Why not? Why? Why not? Why though?
As you can see, I personally think that the narrative in book 2 is a bit of a mess. I don't necessarily hate it, unlike what this entire section might have made you think, but I do wish it had been done better, not only for the sake of the Savanaclaw fans, but also for the sake of the characters of the dorm, whose characterizations are massively dragged down by the wild choices of the plot. And speaking of characters, let's finally talk about the members of the cast in order of relevance to the narrative, to see what kind of image we can paint of them by analyzing their actions within the context of the main story and side events. But before we enter the Savanna, let's turn back for a moment and fall once again into the rabbit hole, so we can address the involvement of the Heartslabyul characters in this dorm and the development they showed compared to their previous roles.
Twisted Wonderland.
At this point, it's a Twist staple to have characters from the previous dorm help out in the main conflict of the following book. But funnily enough, this sort of approach is not that common in this sort of game genre. Gachas need to constantly make newer, prettier, and more powerful characters in order to encourage the players to keep pulling and spending money on the game. Similarly, story-driven mobile games have to constantly update their roster to add even more routes, increasing the time spent playing the game and spending money. So when you have a story-driven gacha game, most of the time you're going to have a constantly expanding cast alongside a constantly growing story and setting, to the point where the starting characters get easily lost along the way, beginning areas get barely used, and even relatively new releases get overshadowed behind the hype for more popular fandom favorites. There are exceptions to this, like Project Sekai, and of course, like Twist. I remember feeling incredibly surprised once I started playing Book 2 and I realized, wait, we're still friends with the Heartslabyul gang? I was so ready to never see them again. Because, yeah, Twist is in no way perfect. Some characters are heavily favored to receive the spotlight in comparison to others. But in terms of the main story, I really appreciate that every book has double the treat for the fans. You get to see the conflict between the new characters while also enjoying the development of the older characters in response to the current issue. It's a really smart pattern that not only helps to redeem the Overblotters from their evil past actions, but it also increases the time fans spend with minor characters, so they're more inclined to pull for them during events. Heartslabyul doesn't get that much time to shine given the length of the book, but you can still clearly see the changes in their dynamics. In Ace and Deuce's case, they'll continue to appear in every book, and their friendship with Yu will slowly start to change for the better. Hell, in this book alone, they already start acting a lot more casual and comfortable with each other, barging into Yu's house as if they lived there, spending lunchtime together, and basically having unspoken conversations. A Deuce are already considered a duo, but it won't be long before Yu, Grim, and them are considered a set. Heartshackle, my beloveds. As for the remaining three members, they have mixed levels of importance. Oh, who am I kidding? Trey's only purpose in this book is to be a damsel in distress and advocate for petty revenge. He gets 2 whole scenes and that's it. And while that upsets me greatly, given that I am a Trey Clover apologist, I can also understand why they chose to sideline him in favor of Cater and Riddle. For the former, it's pretty obvious why. Riddle was the overblottee of Book 1, so he needs the bitter focus in Book 2. An easy choice. But for Cater's involvement, I imagine that the Twist team had to make a few compromises. I mean, Heartslabyul is the biggest dorm of the game, with a whopping 5 members, so the writers had to find a way to fit 10 characters, 5 exposition dumps, 4 twist tunes, a villain corruption/redemption, and an overarching detective mystery, all in one book. Their success in each objective is questionable, but in terms of character screen time, it's clear someone had to get the short end of the stick, and that someone was Trey. He had a lot of focus in Book 1. The conflict was mainly between him, Riddle, and Ace. Deuce and Cater were involved, of course, but the stakes weren't as personal for them. Meanwhile, Trey was the important childhood friend, standing at the center of Riddle's trauma and subsequent meltdown. He was vital for Riddle's battle and redemption at the end. It's no surprise that after all that focus, the writers literally pushed him down the stairs to make room.
Okay, don't worry.
But as much as the fanbase likes to clown on Trey's injured buns in this moment, when you take the scene at face value, you realize that it's quite a poetic continuation to his and Riddle's relationship. Trey rushed to Riddle's side to save him, even at the cost of his own safety. Even if he was aware that Riddle was capable of protecting himself, he still acted instinctively to keep him away from harm. The relationship is not always the greatest, and it might never go back to how it was when they were kids. But even so, Riddle will always be an important person to Trey. Meanwhile, Riddle only only enters the fray after Trey is injured. Sure, he was suspicious before, but after the staircase incident, it got personal. Someone targeted him, but Trey ended up hurt instead, and he definitely wasn't gonna stand for that. This gives a satisfying spin to their new dynamic. Now, it's not only Trey always saving Riddle. Now, they try to help each other as equals and as friends. And I am very normal about that. Trust me. But what Book 2 lacks in Traded, it gives us plenty of K-Rid. Kater and Riddle don't talk a lot in Book 1, or in a lot of following events for that matter, but their dynamic is pretty underrated. I went into more depth about their similarities and ironic differences in my shipping video, but just the fact that their personalities are pretty much foils of each other already provides a lot of fun content to work with. Plus, we get to see that they do care about each other in their own ways, and Kater is very protective over Riddle, holding him back from using his magic without a gem and advocating for his change of heart towards enforcing the rules. It's not a lot, but it gives the fans enough crumbs so they can cook their own food. Plus, let's be honest here, the real losers are always the Deuce and Riddle enjoyers. Regardless of what flavor of dynamic you want for them, they just get nothing in the main story, which is the real crime. Riddle is literally the model student Deuce strives to be. He's smart, he's strong, he's capable. Deuce looks up to Riddle so much, and given his earnest attempts to follow the rules and be better, Riddle definitely has a favorite. I know this in my heart.
If you're saying I play favorites, you're wrong. I love all my children equally. I don't care for Joe.
They do get some scenes together in the Glorious Masquerade event, so I guess we're not technically starving, but I still think their dynamic is criminally underutilized. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with the screen time and development Heartslabyul gets. For all the things this book executes kinda sloppily, they are the least affected. Which, if you're a fan of Heartslabyul, is great news! But if you expected the same love and care to be put into the arcs of the Savanaclaw cast, the game doesn't do the best job at portraying them, but in desperate times, YouTube essayists turn to desperate measures. That's right, dear passengers, I am going to reference a book. The Twisted Wonderland official novels. First published last year with the Heartslabyul arc, the novels are a great way to get further insight into the characters, world, and events within the game. It's not necessarily a one-to-one recreation of the game's canon, existing within its own pockets of continuity, but they are officially approved by the Twist team, so it's as canon as we can get. I don't currently own the novels, but I have read them online, and they're really good. I highly recommend checking it out if you can. They bring a totally different perspective on the entire story of Twisted Wonderland. For this video, as much as I like to spend more time talking about it, I'll be limited to just a few relevant blurbs about the characters in their thoughts that we don't get to see in the game. Still, take it from me, the novel, and especially Savanaclaw, highly improves on a few storylines that the game didn't have the proper resources to tackle. Of course, all of these translated blurbs were taken from the ever-reliable YuuRei and their translations, so go check them out in all their social media. I am going to focus solely on the second novel, but here's one of my favorite parts regarding Riddle's development from Book 1. Facing down and overblooding Leona, Riddle has a confession to make. I am not mocking you, Leona-senpai. I respected you. Gator looks at Riddle with surprise, while Ace and Deuce's eyes go wide. None of them could have ever imagined Riddle saying such a thing, and with such honesty. But what now? Betraying the hopes of your students, lashing out. It's like I'm looking at my past self. Nobody is standing with you now because of what you've done. I understand that more than anyone. Ace and Deuce watch Leona, who stands facing Riddle. They are surprised at first, stunned by the revelation of what has been going through Riddle's mind. And yet, amidst all the emotion, there's a faint but undeniable hint of trust. It is what Riddle has wished for, what he wants to learn from Elias and to gain for himself. Riddle is already looking ahead. He has his regrets and his turmoil, but he still continues on the path of becoming a good house warden. There are some who dismiss the changes brought by his hoverblot as too good to be true, but Riddle is not so weak as to let words like that hinder his progress. This writing is so good. This is so good. I'm so cooked. I'm never gonna escape, am I?
Could you excuse me?
Anyway, let's finally talk about the main boys of this book and discuss how their character stories are handled, starting with our good buddy, Jack Howl.
Twisted Wonderland.
It's not an exaggeration to say that Jack is one of Twist's most underutilized and underrated characters. His appearances in the main story are when the books were still short and sweet, unlike the giant monsters of recent years. And he's definitely not immune to the bad writing of Book 2. But also, in terms of events, Jack is rarely given the spotlight. For reference, his first and only special event was all the way back in 2022 with Portware. Aside from that, he's been relegated to mostly R and SR cards, or not even getting a card despite appearing in the event. Jack fans, I am keeping you all in my thoughts. Stay strong, okay? But despite his lack of screen time, Jack has a pretty well-defined personality across the game, especially during vignettes and special stories. He does sometimes fall victim to the inconsistent writing, which I'll get to, but for the most part, he's a fairly easy character to unpack. Jack initially comes off as a cold, distant, and even downright rude character. In the Japanese text, he's a lot more blunt when we approach him regarding the injured students, and his initial release cards has some pretty mean tap lines. And yet, he clearly has a soft side. He openly talks about caring for his family and making his little sister a flower crown, or, well, doing his best attempt at it. He gets childishly excited about cool feats of magic like the transport bubbles in Octavinelle, and he's an avid caretaker of cacti plants, to the point of being excited about their flower blooming season, or bringing a few home during winter break to keep watering them properly. This easily leads us to a vital conclusion. Jack is a bona fide tsundere. Just take a look at his complicated relationship with Leona. It's pretty obvious that Jack's a big fan of the guy, admitting that he only came to Nyraven College because Leona was one of the students. However, during Book 2, Jack's forced to confront the Lion Man in his absolute lowest, and despite his admiration, he doesn't mince words when he lets Leona know what he thinks about his attitudes and evil schemes. His disappointment towards Leona isn't restrained to just main story content either. During a few events and vignettes, Jack openly trash talks the guy, calling him lazy and a coward. And yet, there are so many scenes of Jack absolutely falling over himself to either protect Leona's reputation, impress Leona with his skills, or just praise Leona's general existence. Sure, you may think this is just classic Twist inconsistent writing, which it could very well be given how many contradictions Jack sometimes has. But I also think that analyzing his actions with the understanding that he is a 16-year-old boy who tries so hard to appear tough and powerful while deep down being rather kind and earnest makes sense in the grand scheme of things. Jack openly admires Ruggie and Leona, except sometimes he doesn't want to let them know that. Jack insists on preferring to work alone, and yet he readily asks for advice from the people he respects. Jack says he doesn't trust people who would suffer for strangers, and yet he doesn't feel good scamming the ghost bride with false declarations of love. Jack spends the entirety of Book 3 helping Yu and the Anemone students against Azul, but not because he cares about those guys, okay? He just wants a fair competition during the exams, that's it. Baka. Funnily enough, Ace often calls out Jack's hidden soft side, both in the main story and in his birthday vignette. Ace would know about being a jerk with a secret sweet side, huh? So yeah, Jack is not exactly a goody two-shoes. There's plenty of moments where he joins in to make fun of his friends, or is incredibly stubborn about his black and white principles, even while battling against injustice. But he's also one of the most lawful good characters in the cast. The guy goes to bed at 10 p.m. I don't think there's any need for further proof. Jack is prone to doing good things for the people of his dorm without expecting any payments back, and even when he was younger, when defending Vil from bullying. So, Jack's meaner actions and constant denial of his feelings are often framed as a tsundere act to keep up the tough guy facade, and I think that this makes for a pretty charming yet still decently flawed character. Since Jack's an avid believer of hard work makes the dream work, he can sometimes come off as oblivious to the struggles of those that can't perform the same way he does, even if they train hard. While Leona's scheme was definitely bad, I also don't think the normal members of Savanaclaw could have simply beaten Males if they trained a bit harder. There's literally no system in place to even the powers between the teams. It would always be an unfair match. And, lightly dipping our toes into Book 3, while Azul's actions were also unfair, given he made contracts with way more than 50 students for the top spots, the action of buying a study guide isn't anything reprehensible. Plenty of students can't focus with just the regular class material and need extra help. But for Jack, he sees such an act as an offense to his principles, because it wasn't a fair competition in his eyes. This kind of character flaw aligns quite well with the fact that Jack is still quite young and naive to how things work for different people with different backgrounds and in different situations. It's the type of flaw that makes you excited to see the character mature and grow out of, changing for the better with time. Not in the canon material, of course. I highly doubt Twist is going to last long enough to make the characters grow into adults, but he does slowly change over time, as seen in recent events. The exploration of character flaws and personal growth also does wonders to fuel fanworks, and I simply eat that up. Something that's also worth pointing out is how many people dismiss Jack's more emotional and mature moments for the sake of a joke punchline. Yes, the instinct to make the big buff guy of the cast fit into funny haha himbo jokes is always going to exist. But not only is Jack canonically one of the smartest characters in the cast, he's also way more emotionally stable than any other 16-year-old has the right to be. Heck, he confronted not only his idol, but also his entire dorm during book 2, and got called a traitor to his face. And yet, he held strong to what he believed was right and carried that hurt silently for so long, and we need to start acknowledging that more.
Talented, brilliant, incredible, amazing, show-stopping.
So, while Jack Howl might not have the screen time, or the cards, or the events, he does have the people. And by people, I mean me, and user Tiny Fantasminha on Tumblr. So you know what? I think he's going to be just fine. Now give him more SSRs.
I keep having this nagging feeling that I've forgotten something.
Hey, if you forgot it, it probably wasn't all that important.
Yeah, I guess.
Twisted Wonderland.
You may think I'm repeating myself when I say that Ruggie is also a severely overlooked character by a large part of the fandom. And you would be right. In terms of the English fandom, Leona always beats these two in popularity, so it's pretty rare to see Jack and Ruggie being appreciated on their own, instead of just being used for comedic bits. In the case of Ruggie, his biggest feat of fame is being used for one of Tater Tot's weird-ass tweets, which I fully believe would be his last straw. But when you start to analyze Ruggie's actual character and story, there's so much untapped potential and interesting discussions you could have, either about his personality, or about his actions during the book, or also about his relationship with both Leona and Jack, and even about his grand standing within the setting of the world in general. So, let's give this little guy some time in the spotlight, shall we? Ruggie is immediately established as the odd one out from pretty much a large majority of the student cast, given that he comes from an impoverished background, growing up in the slums of the Sunset Savanna and being raised solely by his grandmother. Meanwhile, 99% of the people in the school are either average middle-class citizens or eat the rich kind of loaded. This immediately puts Ruggie in a sort of underdog position, given he never received a proper school education before coming to Nyraven College, and his magic capacity isn't shown to be that remarkable. Though his unique magic could certainly be used for way more evil schemes. We're lucky Leona was so focused on a school-level event and not anything actually serious. With just his background, Ruggie already feels almost out of place in the grand story of Twisted Wonderland, because Ruggie is the closest to a normal average guy that we'll ever get. He's very often down to earth, not really interested in getting involved in the insane shenanigans most of the cast gets lumped into, because he cares about his personal safety, thank you very much. He doesn't have a grand spectacular goal, like stealing a throne, or bringing peace to the lands, or fulfilling a journey of self-acceptance, or opening the gates to hell. All that Ruggie wants is to survive, so he can provide for himself and his loved ones in this capitalist society. Most of the actions you see Ruggie take have the common objective of helping him earn his keep, be it working a shift at Monster Lounge, catching rats so he can be recommended for a contest, doing a part-time job at Sam's New Year shop, stealing ancient magical rocks to sell in Magicam, roping the entire school into helping a failing city event in the hopes of being paid extra, and of course, becoming Leona's reliable alarm clock, maid, tailor, cook, messenger, and schedule keeper. The last one is, of course, all for the sake of becoming an indispensable right-hand man to the Leona Kingscholar. You know, a royal prince of the Sunset Savanna. It's literally a golden opportunity. Of course, Ruggie wasn't going to let that pass. For him, just the opportunity to be at this school, getting to improve from his given lot in life, and being able to make all of these connections with insanely powerful youths from all over the world is kinda unbelievable. His success is important not just for himself, but also for his community back home, where many depended on him to get by, since he took care not only of his grandmother, but also of the younger kids who looked up to him. That's why Ruggie can't afford to waste any time goofing around with his peers. Everything has to be min-maxed, since he only has 4 years to gather all of the resources he can in order to make it big in the professional adult world. This ends up making Ruggie a very cunning and self-sufficient character. He's willing to do practically anything if it means he'll get something good out of it. Ruggie rarely makes genuine connections with his peers, but not because he's a completely bad person. Far from it, actually. But more so because, 1, he feels disconnected at a fundamental level from these rich and privileged students. 2, he needs to be resourceful and adapt to new situations thrown at him, so he can't be heavily biased towards a large group of people. I mean, what if he needs to throw them under the bus to survive? And 3, he assumes that everyone carries a similar mindset to his, where if they do something nice for his benefit, he will be the one in debt until a similar action is repaid. Because good people are suckers and scammers, apparently. Analyzing Ruggie can feel a bit comedic, because he's simply not built to be the protagonist of a high-stakes magical fantasy story. That's why in the plotlines where he takes the lead, it's usually within a setting where his streetwise survival skills can be of valuable use, like shown in the Vargas of the Flies event. Ruggie gives major vibes of those normal people trying to survive in the Marvel Universe TikToks, because that's basically his role in 90% of the main story of the game. Recent books have us dealing with these huge political and magical conspiracies, ancient wars between kingdoms, a secret society locking eldritch monsters in the center of the world, singing competitions, and trauma mindscapes. And while that's all happening, Ruggie is just over there in the corner wondering if this counts as extra study hours to put in his resume, because if we all survive, he still needs to apply for a well-paying job. He is simply the most relatable broke king we could ask for. That man is going job hunting during the apocalypse.
Damn. They tearing the city up. Like 10 people just died. Mid-pose. Who gonna pay for this?
Ruggie doesn't rely on magic to make his way through life, because he knows that that's not his strong suit, so he focuses on what he can do through hard work or clever schemes. That's why it's not at all surprising that he willingly got himself so deeply involved in Leona's evil plan during Book 2. But, speaking of Ruggie's involvement in such a scheme, we now come to a point that has been heavily debated ever since the launch of the game, resurfacing again recently with the manga's portrayal of the events. And that is, why wasn't Ruggie the one to overblot in Book 2? Looking at what was set up in the book, it makes sense why people would come to this assumption. The rules of overblotting can get a bit messy in future arcs, but taking into account what was established in this very book, the overblot character can be anyone going through heavy emotional distress, who is also overusing their magic spells without taking the necessary breaks. And yet, during the majority of Book 2, we barely see Leona use his magic before the climax confrontation, where then he activates a sandstorm area effect on everyone present. Meanwhile, there is someone who we know used their magic constantly throughout the book, even in off-screen scenes with the injured students that we didn't get to see. And I'm of course talking about Ruggie. He also pushes past his usual magical limit by using Azul's enhancing potion. Plus, he experiences severe emotional turmoil during his confrontation with Leona, when their plan is discovered and the Lion Man just lashes out on him hard. So yeah, by all intents and purposes, he fits every criteria to overblot. And yet, he didn't. Technically, we know the meta explanation for why. Ruggie is not the main villain stand-in. Leona is. You know, for Scar. The hyenas are not the main villains of the Lion King after all. But bearing those real-world technical explanations, is there a reason in character for this overblot to not have happened? And as a matter of fact, there is not one, but two. The first is what I call the character reason, where if you stop to analyze Ruggie's character, you realize that it's not that he can't technically overblot, but more so that he can't afford to overblot. Based on what we know of Ruggie's childhood, he's used to being in situations where he is at a disadvantage. He's a scrawny guy, he's the type to choose to flight instead of fight, he's shameless and openly greedy, and has basically no sense of stubborn pride to get hurt. If he's pursuing a scheme and it blows up in his face, he's not the type to wallow in it for long. Sure, he might sulk and regret his failures, but he also refuses to stop because of occasional setbacks. Ruggie builds a bridge, gets over it, and goes back to work. That's how he was able to survive and aid his family for so long. Hell, Ruggie is a pro at working in retail and dealing with customer service, which all helps to build the conclusion that Ruggie is just very good at keeping control over his emotions, because he can't afford to lose himself. We fans sometimes forget this, given that every overblot so far has ended without many last-longing consequences for the character, but such an event is usually meant to take a heavy toll over the magician's body. It can even lead to their demise after all. Every overblottee we've had so far has a pretty good control over their magic, and most of them are pretty physically sturdy. But Ruggie, a guy with no magical training up until 2 years ago, and who does not have that much physical power to hold off a corruption, would probably get overtaken by the Phantom pretty easily, if we're talking about just brute strength. However, I don't think Ruggie would ever get to that point. If Leona's whole thing hadn't happened, he likely would have been able to work through his emotions on his own terms, through sheer force of will, and then pursue a plan B. That's why I don't think Ruggie would have been a possible overblot alternative, even if the narrative might have seemed to be building up to it. That's a whole other thing. In my reading of the character, Ruggie simply has too much emotional intelligence to be overtaken by the goth evil goop. But I am also a firm believer in the second reason I mentioned earlier, which is what I like to call the Leona conspiracy reason. You see, there's a pretty popular theory around the fandom circles, where many people believe that Leona willingly siphoned away any blood Ruggie was accumulating into his own body instead, taking the burden of the magic until his eventual breaking point. Now, you might be thinking, why on earth would someone like Leona do that? I mean, he's the same guy who tried to make Ruggie drier than a saltine cracker. What could possibly convince fans that he would be the kind of guy to sacrifice himself for others? Well, I'm glad you asked, my imaginary viewer, because that gives me the perfect hook to finally start talking about our favorite Lion Man. I swear to God, Leona is one of the most complex characters in this game, and so widely misunderstood. Even I had some trouble making his analysis sound coherent, but I have a dream and 4 pages until my self-appointed script limit. Let's freaking do this.
Twisted Wonderland.
To understand who Leona is, we first have to see how he treats other people, because the image he wants to convey and the actions he takes to establish it are vastly different. His most telling relationship is with Ruggie himself. While he might not be Leona's Vice House Warden, Ruggie is the person that never left Leona's side, staying faithfully loyal even after almost becoming hyena jerky. In fact, looping back to what I mentioned in the previous section about Ruggie having a lot of control over his emotions, we see him openly comment on that whole fiasco during Book 3, willingly using the fact that Leona turned on him to make the Lion concede about letting Yuu stay in the dorm. It's unclear if Ruggie is just masking the trauma using humor as a coping mechanism, or if he just brushed off the turmoil of the event, carrying on his duties like usual. But we do see that their relationship definitely changed post-Overblot. I mean, Leona feels bad about it enough to let Ruggie have his way. Outside of the main story, we also get to see sides to the dynamic that are quite endearing. Yes, it's often played for laughs how Leona leaves everything up to Ruggie, and him basically being Leona's maid is a common punchline. But Ruggie himself puts it best when talking to Jamil about the nobles they serve. There's a lid to every pot. Because there are multiple instances where it's implied that Leona knows Ruggie very well, not only caring about his well-being, but also coming up with the perfect excuses to help Ruggie financially without making it seem like charity work, since he doesn't really take it well to being helped out of pity. My favorite example of this is when Leona gives Ruggie free control over his wallet, or when he gives way too much money for a simple purchase. Because unlike what Book 2 may lead you to believe, Leona isn't dumb. He notices things most people pay no mind to, given his sharp senses and huge brain. He just keeps quiet about it because, honestly, who has the energy to deal with all of that, right? Leave it to the shrimp, they can handle it.
Let me pretend I care. Okay, I'm done.
During the New Year's event, we can see that Leona isn't irresponsible with his money, unlike what the rich prince stereotype would lead you to assume. Yes, he buys himself a very expensive blanket without doing any market research, but he explains that the quality of the blanket warrants such a price. It's something he plans to use constantly and for a long time, so it doesn't make sense to go for a cheaper option that's gonna be less durable on the long run. Furthermore, during his hometown event, he's keenly aware of the disparity between the royal family throwing these huge and expensive parties while so much of their population suffer from poverty and droughts. So no, Leona isn't that careless with money. He may not understand the struggles of the working class, but that doesn't mean he's not plagued by the thoughts of it every night.
What the fuck is this kid doing? The voices!
So when you see Leona constantly let Ruggie take advantage of his wallet, sending Ruggie to buy stuff with enough bills to buy things for himself, and give Ruggie free access to steal most of his YuuRei, you realize that Ruggie is a part of the exception and not the norm. Another example of this is when Ruggie says that when it comes to cooking, he just throws together whatever's available, but Leona doesn't complain, going so far as to eat vegetables that he doesn't like as per Ruggie's insistence. Given that we know Leona is very picky when it comes to food, supported both by the main story as well as his judging during the culinary events, we can also assume that this is yet another instance of him making exceptions for Ruggie. But he's not the only one. Jack is the second on the list to receive special treatment from Leona. In his section, we went over how his admiration for him can be conflicting, but Leona's view of Jack is way more simple. He's just a good little guy. He sees potential in Jack. He is skilled, hardworking, and loyal, but with enough guts to stand up when times call for it. While Leona has high expectations for Jack, not mincing his words when he critiques his blunders, he also knows how to encourage Jack's efforts and praise his work, as seen in the Halloween and Port Fest events. Plus, he does have a bit of bias towards the guy. Leona only plays in the New Year's game because of Jack's insistence. He recommends Jack for his hometown competition, and he feels guilty about not considering his health when he gets his stroke. He worries about Jack during the Halloween kidnappings, and he gets way too invested in an argument with Riddle about who has the best first-year students during Fairy Gala if. The options were only between Ace and Jack, by the way. Poor Deuce was once again left behind in the dust. On the topic of first years that Leona also has a begrudging fondness for, Apple is an honorable mention actually. Though, funnily enough, all of the Savanaclaw guys have a close friendly bond with Apple. Jack is his close friend, with Leona and Ruggie being his clubmates. With how much the guy admires Savanaclaw, this is a cute narrative connection. Leona basically only entered the cooking lessons because Apple was there, so it wouldn't be as annoying. Someone please tell Leona his tough guy act isn't fooling anyone, okay? Jamil is another honorable mention given their interactions in Book 6, but that requires a lot of additional context, so just trust me on this one, okay? And finally, Leona is a hardcore feminist. He drinks women respect juice and hails the matriarchy. Praise be.
Let's go, lesbians, let's go!
Okay, I am exaggerating a bit, but this is a common joke in the fandom, given that Leona, canonically, is extra nice to girls. To quote him, I ain't extra nothing to nobody, as if they need men fawning over them. They're already way stronger than us. Going against them only brings more trouble. And while it's fun to say he's a die-hard feminist, I mean, he is, but that's not the point. What the Twist team was probably going for is a lighthearted play on the actual lion pride dynamics in the real world, where there's a large majority of females and less male lions, which results in the ladies doing a lot of the work of protecting and providing for the pride, sometimes being even more territorial, aggressive, and dominating than their male lions. Ruggie even says that the women of the Sunset Savanna have some serious brawn, and that more than half of the Royal Guard are in fact women. I need to move there ASAP. Please! So yeah, Leona knows better than to disrespect a lady. Good for him. Based on all of this, the natural conclusion would be that Leona is actually rather selfless, or at least has plenty of empathy to care about the well-being and safety of plenty of people. The intentions behind his actions during Book 2 can also support this interpretation of the character. You see, Leona is a noble. He's the second prince of the Sunset Savanna. His future is almost guaranteed. He might not like it might not be the future he wanted for himself, but in terms of money and economical power, he's probably going to be fine. So, aside from satisfying his own wounded pride, he didn't really need to go that far to ensure his dorm would win the tournament. No matter how many things he accomplished, he would never ascend to the throne by winning a school event. So he also didn't really need the endorsement from the important scouts. But his dorm students do need it. They don't have a guaranteed future like Leona does. They need their academic achievements and the attention of sponsors to guarantee good job opportunities. And given that most of the Savanaclaw students favor athletics or skills that need a lot of physical prowess, most of them would have benefited a lot from the attention that comes with winning the Spell Drive tournament. So while Leona definitely had his own beef to settle with Maleus, it's also widely believed that a part of him was doing all of this for the sake of the younger students. He's never going to admit that though, the stubborn jerk. This is the interpretation which fuels the Ruggie overblood theory. Leona, who secretly cares way too much, could have used some sort of ancient magic to transfer the blood from Ruggie to him, knowing that he was the mastermind of the plan all along. But hey, that's just one part of it. Because while it's undeniable that Leona definitely has a hidden soft side, he's also a pretty jaded and closed-off character, not mincing words when he's tearing people down, manipulating people when he thinks is the best strategy, and still keeping most people at a comfortable emotional distance. He's on friendly terms with a select few of the cast, and yet you can also tell he rarely opens up to people regarding his true feelings. Is that also inconsistent writing? Not at all, actually. Like I mentioned before, Leona is an incredibly complex character, so we can find the explanation for many of his actions rooted in his upbringing and complicated family history. That's right, folks, it's finally time to talk about his overblood flashback. I'll start off with my nitpicking notes because I want to end the section being positive. So, I don't mean to keep comparing Leona's arc to the others, but his flashback is so short. All of the other overblooders have the entire chapter dedicated to showing us scenes from their pasts, which help to build their current actions. Leona gets 2 scenes. It's only half of the chapter dedicated to delving into his backstory. And I checked. From Riddle to Vil, all of them get a whole chapter to themselves. And Idia even gets 2 whole chapters. Meanwhile, Leona only gets 2.5 minutes. I could not make this up even if I tried. I feel like an insane conspiracy theorist. Because you guys see how this is weird, right? Was the theme just this pressed for time that they couldn't give us even a little bit more? Sorry, I needed to get that out of the way. Let's focus on what we were given. When you break down Leona's backstory, it's very much the second-born noble trope. A pair of brothers find conflict over their inheritance positions. The second-born doesn't believe that the heir is the best choice, or they feel unappreciated because they're not the beloved ruler, while the older one is blissfully unaware of their younger siblings' distress. It's a classic. But the thing is, Leona's inner conflict isn't entirely rooted on the fact that he isn't the king. I mean, he does care about that very much, don't get me wrong, but he also respects his sister-in-law, and his nephew flipping adores him. So he clearly doesn't hold the same animosity towards his family that Scar held, nor would he ever plan to harm Cheka to get to the throne. Rather, the main source of distress actually comes from his relationship with his older brother Falena, and how the two of them were raised. From the moment I was born, there's been a boulder on top of me that's too heavy to move. From the very instant I came into this world. No, long before that, this weight has always been there. Once, when I was too young to understand anything, I asked about it like a fool, and the butler looked genuinely troubled. Not once, throughout all his long years spent serving the royal family, had he ever worn such a perplexed expression. In that moment, I realized I had no right to desire the throne. Not to boast, but I was a clever, intelligent child. But even so, someone should have been able to understand me sooner or later. I will have my chance too. Someday, someone will see me for who I am. I was so certain, and I worked so hard, until I realized it was all for nothing. Falena is meant to be our Mufasa stand-in, though Book 2 doesn't give us much information about him, mainly that he was a cheerful young man, a stark contrast to Leona's moodier disposition, though Leona later refers to Falena as carefree. But the supposedly sticking points for many people was Leona's unique magic, King's Roar, because the last thing a kingdom in the Savanna would want is someone drying everything up, right? Leona's hometown event later reveals that water resources in their nation are still pretty scarce outside of the royal capital. Unique magic that is inherited at birth has nothing to do with the person's will, but humans wrapped up in their own superstitions are ignorant to common sense. Or maybe they think this is a power that I desired and fought to obtain. Either way, they are not worth dealing with. I dislike hassles, and I hate doing things that have no point. And yet, I still find myself thinking, I bet if I were the crown prince, this is what everyone would have said. A promising mage with a strong magical power. He's so thoughtful, composed, and completely different from his carefree younger brother. I knew thinking about it was pointless, but I couldn't stop, and I started to hate myself for it. So, does Leona want to be king? Probably, but not just for the sake of being king. He does want the power to finally bring some change to his kingdom, but I also think Leona believes being king would be a means to an end, as it would finally put a stop to all the unfair judgment and scrutiny he has faced throughout his whole life. Leona's leg is securely bound to the four-legged beast by a length of blood acting like a chain. Cloaked in blood and dragging his leg painfully, Leona resembles an injured lion. Speaking of the changes to his kingdom, that's yet another aspect that isolates Leona from the rest and widens the rift between him and Savanna, because Leona wants to bring modernity and innovation to the Sunset Savanna, which is a nation deeply rooted in old traditions of preserving their natural environment, only taking what's necessary and not investing into large infrastructures. Now, here in the real world, where climate change is slowly but surely dragging our asses, a place like that would be amazing. Living in harmony with nature? Sign me the fuck up! I need out of this capitalist hellscape stat. But the problem comes when this refusal to break from tradition results in many of the citizens in poorer areas still having to rely on well water, lacking paved roads to make transportation easier, and suffering from long drought periods. So, Leona really hates this approach to ruling the nation, but he's just the hated second prince. He has no say in any of this. And after the birth of Cheka, the heir prince for Falena's reign, Leona's chances of becoming the king turned non-existent. I grew tired of thinking, so I decided to enroll at Nyraven College. Though I had no interest in it, I knew I was just running away from the pain, but my heart felt lighter nonetheless. If something is far enough, you cannot long for it. The restlessness dulls, and the pain slowly numbs. But, at some point, even that started to change. A new pack was formed, and with it, new despair. Help us, they said. You're the only one who can do it. Please, just as expected of our house warden, our king. As a king, I cannot let the pack starve. I knew that, but I also knew that Malleus could not be defeated head-on. I had to come up with a plan to take him down and win, by any means necessary. Anything to win. To win! I want to win. No matter what, I want to win. And if I don't, if I give everything I have, and I still lose, what should I do? I've seen people say that Book 2 is weak because they can't relate to Leona. I mean, Riddle's struggles are way more understandable. Everyone's got a little bit of mommy issues, right? Right? But when it comes to Leona, it's apparently a lot harder to imagine being the prince of a nation and being denied the throne, especially since Leona still lives the quote-unquote good life. He's super rich, super strong, super intelligent, super pretty, so what if he can have the throne? Monarchies are overrated anyway. And I can see where these arguments come from, I understand the sentiments behind it. But they're also missing the entire point of Leona's story. When I realized that the plan to remove Malleus had failed, suddenly I understood that everything is pointless, that the future throne I desire does not exist. It didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. It's a fool's errand to strive for something that cannot be obtained. I want to forget it all as soon as possible and be at ease. But the pack spoke eagerly about the future with sparkling eyes. That alone is terrifying. It is not their expectations that scare me. I'm scared of myself, of how pathetic I would be if their words inspired me so that I am never able to give up hope. Leona's arc isn't about a spoiled prince and a sore loser throwing a fit because of the things he can't have. Rather, it's about someone who gave all of his passion and drive towards a goal, only to have it fail over and over, because no matter what they do, no matter how much effort they put in, they'll never be able to achieve it due to circumstances outside of their control. Once Leona had accepted his defeat, had abandoned the tournament, his calm demeanor had seemed to be on the verge of resignation. The sight of his blank expression had made Yuya think that maybe he truly had given up on everything. His eyes, so gentle, had been filled with loneliness. His voice had held neither joy nor sadness. Though Yuya dislikes confrontation, Leona's silence had seemed to warn of a vulnerability that could lead to something even more terrifying. Leona had been akin to a piece of art, listless and unmoving. And so, no matter how much effort Leona puts into it, no matter how many times he tries again and again, no matter how much he dedicates himself towards that dream, it's unachievable, simply because of how he was born or the ability he was given upon birth. And I'm pretty confident in saying that a lot of us, here in the real world, can relate to that. Relate to working so hard towards your dream goal only to be barred from it because of something you can't change. And even so, still have people judge you and criticize you for it. Somewhere in my heart, there's still the lingering hope that maybe I can still do it. It's an unbelievably optimistic, sweet thought, filled with wishful thinking. Ruggie, Jack, and the others all talk about these foolish dreams that will never come true. But in the end, I'm just as much a fool as they are. I'm not strong, I'm not wise, and I'm not loved. Is this who I am? I can't accept that. That's the one thing I do not want to admit. I'm utterly fed up with how unreasonable I am. Don't make me think that there might be a chance. Just let me believe that there's no point in having expectations. I am tired of struggling and suffering for things I cannot attain. I hate knowing how insignificant and boring I am. People say I should try. What else can I do? I've already given up everything I have. Maybe what I should be striving for is the strength to give up. And that sounds like the most painful thing of all. Life truly is unfair. There are two main themes at the core of Book 2's narrative: helplessness and unfairness. Being forced to survive in an unfair system. Feeling helpless to elevate your position unless you're one of the lucky ones. Being witness to an unfair scheme against innocent people. Feeling helpless because someone you admired is going off the deep end and you can't really help them. Being unfairly hated for things you didn't choose. Feeling helpless in a system unfairly balanced against you and having to accept the fact that you can't really do anything about it. Because life isn't fair, I guess. It's a pretty downer conclusion. No wonder they resorted to cheating. I mean, if you play by the rules, if you try to do things right, you still won't be able to get what you want. So why should you be controlled by that system? It's not going to favor you. It's not going to let you achieve your dream. Why shouldn't you use underhanded methods to win? After all, who cares if people get hurt in the process, right? You get to succeed. Isn't that worth it? The answer to those questions is going to vary from person to person, of course, but I think it's safe to bet that most folks would agree hurting others just for the sake of your ideals isn't very nice. In the end, to quote that one horse show, life is a bitch and you keep living. You unfortunately and begrudgingly have to come to terms with your own limitations and circumstances, and then you find a new goal to strive towards, or a better approach to consider, or a new role that makes you feel just as satisfied, and you just keep going. And hopefully, you get to keep some good company along the way. At least, that's what happened with Leona. And honestly, I think he's better off for it. It is a Savanaclaw standoff. An absolute lion dominates the field. Everyone who beholds him can feel the overwhelming dominance that Leona exudes, that of a king. Despite recent events, it seems that Leona has not lost the trust of Savanaclaw's students. It is a testament to how skilled their house warden truly is, and the degree to which they respect him. Even in Leona's battered state, no one hesitates to obey him. Voices full of trust call out as the Savanaclaw athletes hurry over. They gather before Leona, addressing him as House Warden. Leona's eyes can be briefly seen darting here and there over their huddled heads. It is such a fleeting moment that one might not believe that it happened at all. Perhaps he has resisted some urge, or maybe come to a decision. Either way, his emotions are indecipherable. The game resumes.
Twisted Wonderland.
To put it simply, Book 2's overall narrative suffers from two very opposite points: setup without payoff, and payoff without setup. Situations are built upon during large portions of the book and yet end up being irrelevant. Meanwhile, the emotional climax is diminished by the fact we lacked the time and scenes to properly build to it. It also doesn't help that in the English version of the game, both mentions to Leona's brother and his status as the hated second prince are completely erased, making his motives even murkier and nonsensical for English-only players. Thanks, Twist Team! Is Book 2 bad? Yes and no. I can see the vision, okay? I can see the creative intent for what they wanted to do with these characters. I see the parallels they wanted to make with the original movie and how they wanted to implement new ideas. The problem really lies in the execution here. The game doesn't spend any time making the audience understand the isolation and hatred Leona feels back home, nor does it expand upon why Leona wants the throne. I mean, we had no reason to doubt Falena's reign based on Book 2 alone. Since he's supposed to be the Mufasa stand-in, most people would assume he would also be a great and wise ruler. It wasn't until Leona's birthday voice lines and his hometown events that we learned about Falena's subpar skills at handling certain aspects of the nation. And that's all material outside of Book 2's range, which unfortunately ends up bringing down the book quite a lot. And not just that, but also a large part of Leona's character motivation. Hooray! Book 2 could have been improved in a variety of ways. Take advantage of the fact that you're in a school setting and make the expositions feel more natural in the form of classes. Don't spend so much time with non-dorm characters, or at least make them more relevant to the main conflict. Use more NPCs. It was a big tournament. Add some NPCs from the Sunset Savanna and you have a guaranteed source of information about Leona's popularity back home. Let your main antagonist shine in more scenes. For Mickey's sake, Twisted Wonderland, give your teams more time to cook. YuuRei can do so much better. Everything in this book is unfortunately in detriment to itself. It's almost impressive. And I still don't fully hate it though. Surprisingly. This is my child, Savanaclaw arc. They have every disease, but they get better. And that's what really matters, right? Thankfully, we're not fully done with Savanaclaw, as they return in full force during Book 3 and join forces with us to go hunt some fish. It's not much, but I'll settle for it. Unfortunately though, we'll have to fight the ocean next time. Until then, remember to love, laugh, Leona.
And what if I were to just innocently murder you, Will? I'd still have to go to trial. Probably get off with justifiable homicide.
Thank you all so much for watching. If you've made it this far, congratulations, we've reached the end of today's voyage. Careful as you disembark, since your luggage might have gotten jostled around a bit during the landing. I can't believe I'm actually done. Good lord, this video took so long to make. Can you guys believe I thought I was going to manage talking about books 2 and 3 in the same video? What was that guy smoking, am I right? Yeah, no, my ramblings got a little bit off the rails with this one. I wanted to post this so much sooner, but hey, what can you do? I mean, I could yap less, but I would actually explode if I did that, so I'll just settle for taking it steady. Making content for Twist is extra slow for me because I like to check everything, ever, all the time, to ensure that I'm not missing any key details. So, while parts 2 of the shipping video and more parts of the deep dive are definitely in the works, I'll be taking my time and ensuring that I don't burn out on this game. With my luck, we'll keep going for 10 more years and I'll have plenty of time to spare. Fingers crossed. And hey, what do you guys think of Book 2? Did you enjoy it when you first played it, or did it take some time to warm up to it? Tell me your favorite Twist book so far in the comments, please. So far from what I've seen online, books 5 and 6 are strong contenders for the top spot until book 7 is finished, that is. In however many years that may be. And hey, if you want to see me lose my mind over Twist, Black Butler, Miraculous Ladybug, or any other fandom that I'm involved in, then please check out my social media. The links will be in the description. And if you enjoyed this video, then consider watching another one and hitting the subscribe button. That way, you help my channel grow, and you also won't miss any new voyages we take in the future. Above all else, I hope you all have a great day or night, stay safe, stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.